to create a global AI hub to exchange knowledge and experience, connect and unlock the potential of cognitive technologies across industries, society, and borders. Today, I am pleased to welcome you on our 10th Cognitive Virtual in 2020, a condensed version of Swiss Cognitive, where in 3 hours we deliver what we stand for, bringing AI leaders and experts together to learn, grow, and define our way forward for society and business and share for success. We are honored to have incredible minds on our stage today from the UN, WEF, MIT, BCG, Rolls-Royce, Bank of America, Cognizant, GlaxoSmithKline, and many more. Check our event website to see what is coming up in the next 3 hours. Now, let's jump straight into the content. Florine Manaela, a warm welcome to you. As a business partner of IBM, it's my great pleasure to invite you on stage. Florine is an executive IT architect in cognitive systems at IBM Systems, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Besides leading a panel, Florine will be giving a closing keynote of today's Cognitive Virtual. Welcome, Florine. May you share with us a little teaser about your keynote at the end of our event, AI in 2021, a global outlook, literally. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone will enjoy this event, and I hope you will stay with us until the end when I try to present some of our results of how the training neural networks can affect the climate change and is generating a lot of CO2, and what we can do and what we should expect in the upcoming years in terms of innovations to overcome the today challenges we face. So hopefully you will stay with us and you will enjoy wherever you are.
Many thanks, Florine, for the teaser. We will be welcoming you again on stage at the end of this event, hearing more about AI in 2021, the global outlook, literally. Now, it's my great pleasure to welcome with me our colleague Sylvain Duranton from BCG Gamma on stage. Dear Sylvain, you are the global leader of BCG Gamma, a united dedicated to applying data science and advanced analytics to business. You manage a team of more than 900 data scientists and have implemented custom AI and analytics solutions for companies across the globe. Sylvain, AI in 2021, ready for a reset. The stage is yours. We're getting there. In the meantime, I will ask you to use the chat. If you have any kind of questions or comments, we'll be more than happy to answer, or also perhaps colleagues across the globe will be able to answer your questions. The chat is here also to have a conversation and to virtually meet between all our Swiss Cognitive partners and colleagues around the globe. We're still trying to get ourselves set. As you all know, it's always the same. We're talking about robots, AI, algorithms, but sometimes we're just struggling with basics, infrastructure, and we're going to do our best to overcome that. So remain with us and give us a chance to get set. So in the meantime, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about how Swiss Cognitive overcome this 2020 and why we are so keen to look forward to 2021. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are celebrating the 10th Cognitive Virtual now. I just got, okay, sorry. The reason why we had to move, obviously, to virtual stages is due to Corona. But the great benefit is that now we have the chance actually to reach out to great experts and AI thought leaders around the globe and share their expertise and their knowledge with all of you. This is one of the things that obviously we couldn't do as long as we had to connect physically. On one hand, from a logistic point of view, and obviously also from a financial point of view. So this is definitely one of the advantages. And saying that, reach out to us if you also belonging to the AI thought leaders or have use cases you would like to share with the community, have something to say, great thoughts, great developments, and we will be more than happy to share your developments and your organization's use cases with us. Now, we are getting to Sylvain. Sylvain, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Dalit, and thank you everyone for joining virtually, but hopefully very engaged. Yes, 2020 for me will be a pivotal year for AI, and I'm convinced 2021 will be a year of great reset for AI in the world. The year was not such a good start for AI, obviously. You remember that the press pointed a number of hiccups when COVID started, like, late deliveries, unnecessary stocking or stockouts in other place, and AI was accused of, not being strong enough and helpful enough to help navigate through COVID. I think the absolute opposite, and I think AI has proven its case even more in 2020 than in the past, and that's why we are just about to see what I call the AI Great Reset. And the first part of that reset is a massive acceleration of AI. We at BCG do regular surveys of C members of large corporations around the world. And in the surveys we did in July, 85% of C-suite members say that accelerating the agenda on AI and the deployment of AI is a high priority for them. And there's a good reason for that. If you look at the performance of AI champions, companies who are more advanced than the others as far as AI is concerned, they have outperformed their peers during the COVID crisis in unprecedented ways. Not only did their revenue and their stock market value decreased much less at the peak of the pandemic at the start, which was in March and in April. And in terms of recovery, since the first big wave of COVID, their recovery has been much faster than those of other companies. And all executives are eyeing at those companies and want to do the same and want to catch up. And there's a good reason for that. We do regular survey with MIT on AI, and this year we have interviewed more than 2,500 executives in companies all over the world across sectors to see where they were on AI. And today, 70% of companies are trying to deploy AI, but they recognize no benefits at all. Then you have 20% of companies who recognize some benefit and some return on their AI investment, something around 1 percentage point of margins. And for large corporations above $1 billion of US dollars, 10% of companies recognize profits in excess of 2-3 percentage points of incremental EBITDA margin, which is super significant. And those AI champions who now enjoy 2 to 3 percentage points of extra margin versus competitors will be extremely difficult to catch up with. And that's why everywhere at C-suite level in companies, the acceleration of AI has been the new name of the game in most companies in the world, 85%, as I was saying. So AI is accelerating, and COVID has accelerated the need for AI. But the AI that we'll see getting after COVID, which is accelerating right now, is different from the AI we were used to have. And that's why I call this notion the Great Reset. First thing, we'll be using different kinds of data. Many systems through COVID crisis have been totally decalibrated. And regular IT systems or AI systems built in the past that were using loads of historic data to build some forecast models have been fully decalibrated. And using last year data to know how much we'll be selling this year in the COVID world with volatility everywhere, half of the world closed down or about to close down, those historic data have lost their relevance and they are totally useless today. And now many advanced companies are recalibrating all their systems and rebuilding new AI engines using real-time high-frequency data, microeconomic data, macroeconomic data, epidemiologic data, on the pandemic situation across the world, web traffic data, and web traffic is a wealth of data to know real-time which competitors, which brands are active. GPS traces are also massively used, and companies tend to correlate those high-frequency real-time data with their actual data from the past weeks to build some relevant models. And where we see typical, historic baseline system completely lost, this way to forecast sales or activity based on real-time data to know whether you should open stores or not, close factory, how to manage the supply chain, how to identify risk of insolvency for customers, is the right response in the current environment. We have a much shorter historic period which is relevant, just a few weeks or few months in many places of the world, but this is compensating that with using large sets of data which are extremely rich to build those forecasts. So Reset is about using new types of data and those high-frequency real-time data. Reset is also changing the mindset on how AI is built and to try less to mirror what people are doing and to mimic human operators, but more enhance them. Let's take an example. If you take banks, for instance, today one major topic for many banks is how to assess the risk of insolvency and bankruptcy for clients. In the past, banks were using AI to do that already. And on SME credit risk assessment, you have human credit analysts who once a year look at the financial data and the latest financial statement from a company and try to see whether there are some risks. And if the situation is assessed like risky, then the credit analyst would deep dive, meet the company and do some specific analysis with that company. In the past, AI was about, trying to do what the credit analysts were doing. So the AI engines were fed with tons of credit assessment files from the past so that AI could learn how to read the financial statement, could try to understand how the credit analysts were assessing risk based on those financial statements to decide whether a company is risky or not. In COVID, if you start to try to assess solvency risk based on financial statements issued once a year, clearly you're out of the game. You need to be much more reactive and much more real. And that's where banks have started to use those high frequency data on every company by sector, using microeconomic indicators, comparing companies, same size, similar sector, different sectors across the world to get to real-time assessment of whether a company is on the verge of bankruptcy or not. And that's not trying to mimic what a credit analyst was doing in the past with a financial statement. It's a totally new way of thinking. No credit analyst could make any sense of the real-time transaction data of a company with thousands and thousands of transactions per day. AI can. And that's where we see that AI is no longer trying to just mimic what human operators were doing, taking the same data and trying to make sense out of them like a human operator would be doing, but there's a whole new set of much more data-driven algorithms designed from the start to be purely data-driven, which are working as a complement to human operators that will continue to do, in the case of solvency risk assessment, they will continue to do the deep dives and the detailed analysis on companies which are doomed to be or deemed to be at risk. So we see that AI is using different kinds of data, high frequency real-time data, and that it means that algos and the way AI is deployed is new and much less human-like and much more data-driven in a way. And what the survey we do with MIT is also showing is that companies who start to really think through deeply how to best get those algos and human work together rather than just mimic human are much more likely to make a lot of money. And we have examples, for instance, in the retail sector, where some retailers have tried to replace people who replenish the shelves in the stores with robots. And that's trying to mimic what humans do. And that has been an utter failure because it was not convenient for robots to be in the middle of the aisles with the people and the shoppers, and basically this has failed. Some other companies have used computer vision to identify where shelves needed to be replenished. But then human operators were still doing the replenishment. But all the time that was spent by human operators to try to see where there needed to be some replenishment is now done by AI using computer vision. That's showing that, and that's very successful and enables to improve service levels and a net promoter score from shoppers and also reduce cost at the same time. That's a modern way and a reset way of using AI, which is very different from just trying to build robots that would just replace people and do everything human operators are doing. And I think the use of high frequency data will push more into this direction because anyway, humans can't do anything with high frequency data. So, different data, less mimicking human, but, smarter AI in a way. And the last very important dimension is about responsibility. And responsible AI has become an extremely important topic. It's much talked about. And, there's big promise of improvement for corporate world and society at large through deploying AI. But there's a risk of backlash if this is not done in a way that the general public, the consumers, the citizens judge responsible. And if there's a backlash, this is jeopardizing the whole promise of what AI could bring to the planet. And of course, responsible AI has been a lot talked about. There is more than 60 frameworks of responsible AI principles, which have been issued all over the world in the last 2 years by different public institutions, OECD, UN, governments, foundations. Everyone has come with their own set of responsible AI principles. Now, the time is to move to real responsible AI in actions in company. And to do that, there are 3 topics, basically, to get it into the field. One is ethics. Second is robustness of what tech is doing. And lastly, I'll talk about frugality. Ethics is clear. I'm doing a use case. Will this be for the greater good, or am I at risk at creating victims from my algo? A bit what we saw with some pricing engine that went mad and started to charge super high prices to customers who had no choice or who were not really equipped to compare prices. This part is very well covered, and we now see in many companies people with some sort of ethic charter, and we even see positions like chief ethics AI officer coming, and a lot is there. I think the first blind spot is on the robustness on tech, because it's one thing to say, okay, this to check that a use case is for the greater good. It's another one to make sure that what is being developed is solid, robust, transparent, traceable, using data in a rigorous way, and will product repeatable results that people understand. And that's an area where accountability and transparency is super critical. We need to make sure that we have teams that peer review what is being done. We need to have accountability for design, accountability for testing in different hands. There's a very important topic here. And the last one is frugality. And frugality is about having AI stop being voracious, because today AI is voracious in the use of data and voracious in the use of CPU. And voracity has problems, because the more voracious the algorithms are, the more difficult they are to check, challenge, and vet. And also, AI is generating more and more emissions, and emissions linked to the training of algos are not big today. It's less than 1% of the world's emission of CO2 and greenhouse gases, but this is growing exponentially. And I think it's important that companies move to something much more frugal to make sure that better design of algos, and better choice in where they locate their servers, data scientists start to reduce the carbon footprint of their own training of algos. And if they do that smartly, there are ways to reduce that by 80 to 90% quite easily. And there's a Code Carbon, which is an open source software, which is helping every data scientist to reduce their own CO2 emission. And I think it's an easy first step for everyone into responsible AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvain. I took 3 points with me: massive acceleration of AI, rise of high-frequency data, and the need for responsible AI. We have one question coming out from the community. Sylvain, the question is, can we model an AI algorithm without differentiating?
Without?
Differentiating.
So I think the differentiation comes from two things: the data a company can use, and data who have more companies, more data, we see that very well with the GAFA, have a competitive advantage of others. And then there's also a competitive advantage and the differentiation you can build in the way you will be building, designing, and deploying your algos. And we see companies which have access to similar size of data pools and, in similar industry, who do very differently on AI because they deploy AI more effectively and they design AI engines better.
Thanks. I do have a second question. Are you including privacy-preserving AI in each of these topics, like federated learning or differential privacy?
It's a very important topic, part of the responsible AI, I would say, mega topic. And privacy and how to deal with privacy of data is critical. And that's where I'm fighting for a frugal way to do data and not the voracious way to use every data companies have in any situation to code anything. And the fight for privacy is a very big fight because the general public knows that there's a lot which is happening on their own data that they are not aware of. And I think either differentiated privacy, and some companies offer differentiated privacy levels to their consumers, or through consortium. And there are some institutions who try to build consortium of citizens and to manage the privacy questions and how they deal with the different players in terms of privacy data in a consolidated way. But yes, privacy will be one of the key topics for next year.
Thanks, Sylvain. We are looking very much forward to an exciting Cognitive 2021 with you and BCG together. See you soon. Now to you, to the audience, please use the chat, use the backstage if you want to have further discussions with our speakers. Now we're going to come to our first panel. Our first panel is being moderated by Florine Manaila, whom you have seen before quickly on stage already. The panel will be about cross-industry. Florine, you are an AI architect at IBM, leading enterprises transformation by adopting of high-performance computing, distributed deep learning, and emerging technologies in order to help them to rapidly transform the way businesses operate, solve problems,
Can you hear something?
And gaining
No, I don't
competitive
hear
advantage.
I hear you.
You are responsible for the performance, availability, and scalability of cognitive systems infrastructure. You have created IBM distributed deep learning and reference architecture, as well as important industry blueprints for applied AI, including Edge Fabric. Your client experience covers EU commercial and government, civil and defense agency. You're passionate about in-memory computing and spiking neural networks. With Florine on the panel, we are welcoming Moana. Moana, you are an AI development strategist leading the London AI team for Rolls-Royce. You have a PhD in AI with Research Excellence Award from the University of Leeds and are the runner-up positions for the best PhD dissertation in AI in Europe by the European Association for AI for your work in the field of cognitive robotics. Congrats, this is really great. You speak 2 human languages and 7 computer languages, and you're an advocate for using AI for the good of humanity. In addition, I would like to welcome Anne. Anne, you are head of the Novartis Foundation, an organization committed to transform the health of low-income population by leveraging the power of data, digital technology, and AI to reimagine health and care around the world. Passionate about improving population health through data, digital and AI, you apply your relentless commitment to overcoming health inequities to pioneer solutions that can advance health and care globally. You chair the Board Band Commission for Sustainable Development Working Group on Digital and AI in Health, and are a member of the International Advisory Board of the Commonwealth Center for Digital Health. With you together, we have Christopher. Christopher, you are former top US cyber diplomat, the president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation, board member of the Center of Internet Security and commissioner at Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. Now, Florine, it's my pleasure to hand over to you. Enjoy the panel.
Thank you very much. We are all here remote in this COVID pandemic. That has shown us actually the light on how the health systems are insufficient, prepared, and equipped to address all the challenges they currently face. So I will want to ask Anne how we can take advantage of this pandemic to re-engineer the health system from being a reactive care system to become proactive, predictive, and even preventive health system that can keep the population they serve healthy. So Anne.
Thank you, Florine. And as you rightly say, the COVID pandemic is unfortunately a wake-up call to all of us that our health systems are not ready to address all the challenges they face nowadays. And COVID is just a wake-up that we are constantly facing the threat of new emerging diseases, while we also cope with an enormous burden of chronic diseases such as cardiovascular disease or cancers, and in low and middle income settings, still an enormous burden of infectious diseases at the same time. So health systems cannot address that all together. This was pretty obvious during the pandemic. And at the same time, COVID has catapulted us into the digital era, if you may. And it took even the most skeptical healthcare providers over the line to see the benefits of providing or of using digital technology in their health services. So providing virtual care has now become the new normal. And it often became a question of life and death if you had access to digital technology to address your health needs or not. And lastly, let me end by saying that in the frame of our work with the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, in the group that looks at health and how digital and AI can transform that, we looked at a landscape analysis of how artificial intelligence is already having a tremendous impact on the health of millions of people around the world, not only in high-income countries, but also in low and middle-income settings. And it's mainly 5 use cases that we identified. One is population health. Obviously, AI has been tremendously useful in predicting where epidemics will further spread or even preventing them. And during the COVID, AI was the first even picking up that there was an unusual cluster of these pneumonia cases in Wuhan. So it's really tremendously important in population health. It accelerates research and development of drugs and therapeutic options because you can scan massive libraries of drug candidates to discover new drugs. You can do your clinical trials much faster. And next to that, in clinical care, we've seen the massive advantages for image-based diagnosis to use artificial intelligence and help the radiologist, dermatologist, or pathologist to make more accurate and faster diagnosis. And next to that, there's this great patient-facing solutions already that use chatbots or other solutions driven by AI. And to give you just one example, in China with Ping An Good Doctor, they deliver 1 billion consultations per day thanks to their 24/7 internet hospitals, internet health centers, and pharmacies. It's truly a tremendous advance in delivering access to healthcare for all the people who need it, regardless where they live. And lastly, AI also transformed the way we can organize our health systems. It optimizes all the processes that can be automated, like staff planning, supply chain planning, all of that helps a lot. And based on all of these beautiful examples of AI in health, we distilled a roadmap for countries. If they want to deploy AI in their health system, they have to invest now in the right domains. And it's not only about data and infrastructure, but about 6 domains. And a very important one is investing in your people's skills, in the capabilities of health workforce, tech workforce, to address the lack or the gaps in data science knowledge and all the things that go with using machine learning, but also in investing in the processes with which the solutions will be integrated in the health system. Because if that's not thought about in the beginning, there will be a lot of resistance by healthcare professionals to integrate it. Right. So with that roadmap towards maturity or readiness for countries to deploy AI in their health systems, we want to support all countries around the world to tap into this fantastic potential of AI in the health system and help them advancing on their readiness to deploy it.
Right. So, and by moving forward in this post-COVID world, how do you see the healthcare practice changing permanently or not? How do you see this moving forward?
Yeah, one thing that is definitely, I was very happy to see that the virtual care has become normal. In fact, we've been advocating for telehealth to be reimbursed since more than 10 years. We've been scaling telehealth throughout Ghana, for example, in Africa, and we advocated for its reimbursement because you can increase access and you can increase quality of care tremendously because you can centralize expertise if you don't have enough doctors, for example. Healthcare workers shortage is a big challenge that all the health systems face in the world. So virtual care is the new normal. I love it. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for the whole world to tap into that potential. And AI can innovate in the at the edge of that. So you can do the triage by non-skilled health workers thanks to the guidance of AI-driven decision support systems. So that's a beautiful thing. Secondly, you can bring care to where people are, to where they live, work, and play, thanks to that digital technology, and also thanks to many automated access improving tools that AI can bring. And lastly, patient engagement in taking more responsibility in the management of their own health has also become has also gotten a catapult step forward, I would say, thanks to the COVID situation where we are faced with not having access to a physical consultation.
I see. So thank you very much for these insights. I will want to, first of all, see and go forward to Dr. Muhammad Al-Omari and ask him, how AI is being utilized at Rolls-Royce in those times. So can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Florin. And I want to first say there were some excellent points raised by Anne, so thank you for that. And as Anne mentioned, so COVID-19 has actually changed the entire industry. It was basically a wake-up call to various industries, and engineering is no exception. Well, in a good way or a positive way, I'm glad to say that AI or the development or the use case of AI have been accelerated tremendously over the past year, because of the rise of this pandemic. But even before that, AI was used in various units in Rolls-Royce. So obviously, we're a massive engineering company. We develop lots of products, a lot of which are safety critical. For example, our airplane engines or the development of the civil nuclear reactors. So there's a lot, at stake when you're developing these products. And AI offers a great tool in your tool set to monitor and make sure that your systems are working as they should. So one key example that where AI has been used extensively over the past 3 decades, actually, is within our engine health monitoring program, which is thought as our kind of the crown jewel in terms of the data analytics within Rolls-Royce. So within that program, we stream data from thousands of engines that are flying across the globe and analyzing this data live to ensure the safety of our engine, obviously the passengers that are flying with the Rolls-Royce products. But moreover, or kind of more recently, we have been seeing a surge in demand for AI capabilities within, for example, supply chain. Again, as Anne alluded before, that we have seen tremendous changes in the market and how it behaves and the supply and demand in our product. And AI offers a great way to forecast and predict and plan for the best outcome within the supply chain. We've seen significant savings and risk mitigations being delivered to Rolls-Royce by deploying some of these clever AI algorithms internally. But one kind of key area for AI, which is not really kind of famous in terms of your typical AI applications, is in the digitalization space. So Rolls-Royce is sitting on a wealth, and I mean really truly staggering amount of information that have been documented through many years, and all of which is locked down in these reports. And currently what we're doing is we're utilizing the state-of-the-art in computer vision and natural language processing to mine for information from this wealth of knowledge and make it available for our engineers to improve the design and safety of our products. So yeah, plenty to talk about, but I guess this is kind of a snapshot of the latest that is happening in Rolls-Royce.
So if you try to see, the impact that the COVID-19 had into the aerospace industry, can you give us an example of how the AI is used in your company for helping coping with this situation?
Sure, absolutely. So obviously, the COVID-19 have severely disrupted the civil aviation industry, as you mentioned, and Rolls-Royce was one of the players that suffered tremendously from the impact of COVID-19. However, I should say it's not all dark and gloomy. So there are also some positive or kind of good things to share about what happens. And as the saying kind of goes, never let a crisis go to waste. So I'm kind of hopeful or glad to say that when this pandemic started back in February, March, when everyone was still kind of trying to assess what would the impact look like, we shifted our attention and focused solely in trying to map and understand what would the impact be on the various business units. And very quickly, we were able to realize through analyzing massive amounts of data that were available at the time to basically alert the various units to say there will be severe disruption. This is actually much more serious than kind of some other news agencies have been trying to portray. And because of that, we were able to start a number of projects to focus on the supply and demand. I should say this is probably one of the key activities where AI helped tremendously Rolls-Royce throughout this kind of period of this pandemic. And the story goes is obviously as the civil aviation industry is forecasted to be disrupted, we were anticipating less demand on our products, and therefore we were projecting that we'll have to cancel some of our orders from the supply chain. And I'm glad to say that we were not only focused on money or saving cost, which obviously is a big factor always, but also we were looking into the health of our supply chain, trying to ensure that we also take into account that our suppliers do not struggle to the point where we bankrupt them or we kind of go into administration because of the amount of the orders that we might cancel. So therefore, we came up with an intensive plan or program to ensure that we're obviously maintaining the cash position for Rolls-Royce by cancelling as much orders as possible, but at the same time taking into account the health of our supply chain. So this is probably kind of one of the key activities that happened in Rolls-Royce. And again, as Anne mentioned before, automation is now being discussed more seriously throughout the organization. Digital transformation is easy to talk about, but it's obviously a lot of work if someone wanna do it. But with this pandemic and with the reduction of the number of workers in Rolls-Royce, you see more appetite and actually willingness from the business units to start the work there. So yeah, some positive stories, as I said.
I see. So actually implementing all these kind of things and this technology relies on the data. Either if you look on healthcare, either if you look on what's happening in the aerospace industry and manufacturing industry. So the concern here, and I'm looking right now to Chris, is how, Chris, do you see the evolution of the cyber threat and use of artificial intelligence, because those are kind of merging together into the future?
Yeah, and unfortunately, as with all technologies from the beginning of time, the technology itself is often neutral. It's how it's used. It's the human element. And what we've seen with every technology, including the internet and now with AI, is that there are good and positive uses for it. But unfortunately, bad actors, whether they be criminals or nation states, use it for bad purposes as well. And as Anne was saying, we've all become more dependent on these technologies because of COVID-19. And unfortunately, we've seen a number of bad actors either intruding into vaccine development or perhaps interfering with the supply chain. So it's always been a cat and mouse game between the bad guys and the good guys. Now, with AI, I'll start with the bad news and move to the good news. It's always better to end on the good news. The bad news is that criminals, sophisticated criminal groups and nation states are using AI to craft cyber attacks, and that's going to accelerate as we move forward in the future. And so part of the reason for that is it helps them evade defenses. It helps them quickly change what's called their tactics and procedures, or TTPs, to avoid detection and software that's out there to detect them. So I think we're going to see that accelerate. The good side is that it's also informing the defenses in this cat and mouse game. And I think we've seen a lot of that recently, and that's here now. AI is here now. I serve on an advisory board for a company called Palo Alto Networks, but there are many others who are incorporating machine learning and AI in their products. And the point is that AI can dramatically simplify and automate cybersecurity defenses. It could also be predictive. In other words, you don't have to know what the attack looks like or the intrusion looks like. You can predict it using AI, and that's incredibly valuable. It can also free up folks who are involved in the front lines of protecting networks to deal with the more difficult ones. It can automate taking care of a lot of the different attacks and intrusions we see every day, and that's very useful too, and really allows the human element to function more. So it's a mixed message, right? The threats are getting greater. People are using this tool, but at the same time, it can be used for good, and it is being used for good.
So, because we see more a mix, having more stakeholders, how do you see the managing of this transition to a stakeholder artificial intelligence governance, and the strategy around this, governments, corporations, and so on?
Yeah, that's difficult, and this has also been something we've dealt with in the internet context more generally. How is the internet governed, and how is technology governed? And the recognition that if it's just governments alone, that often is something that impedes innovation and leads to, I think, often, depending on what states you're talking about, repressive states controlling information in ways that are not helpful to society writ large or the economy. So it's interesting. Just yesterday, our Congress, and it hasn't gotten through the full Congress, approved legislation about an AI strategy for the U.S. And one of the things it said, and I think everyone on this call knows this, is that there are a proliferation of AI, national artificial intelligence strategies, plans, statements, investments, various industry ones out there. There's so many ones out there that it's hard really to figure out what's going on. So it's important, I think, for us to bring those different strategies together and think about how they work. And the other thing this congressional strategy talks about is the importance of governments working with the private sector and civil society and other stakeholders. And I think that really is critically important, because there are lots of other questions that are dealt with here, including the ethical uses of AI. And this statute also talks about gaining trust from the public, particularly in terms of military uses of AI. So you have to have this conversation. It just can't be governments acting alone. It has to be this multi-stakeholder conversation to figure out what the best way forward is.
Right. So if you look here, when you think all about IT and AI in general, it's all about data, right? So there are a bunch of general privacy principles we have to apply, like it's effective, proportional. It's what are the trade-offs when you try to build policies around it, and limit the amount of data that is being collected and needs to be collected for AI purposes? How do you see this thing?
Yeah, again, that's a really big challenge. There's this old phrase, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you have the wrong data, or if you have skewed data or biased data that goes in, and we dealt with this in some of the big data reports years ago, you're going to bias the AI algorithm you have. You're going to bias the results you get. At the same time, there are legitimate things like the GDPR trying to protect data, but we need to find a way to have adequate data there that's representative of the population, that gives us an advantage. And there's also this competition among states. If some countries have access to all the data and other countries, because of other laws, are constricted to only having a little bit of data, that's going to create a competition problem. So we really do have to think about this, recognize the importance of privacy, but at the same time recognize the good that these systems can bring and have appropriate protections in place.
Thank you. So I think it's very clear, where we are going. But in closing to our panel, I would like to ask each one of you, just a few words on how do you see AI moving forward in the next 2 to 3 years. So Anne?
Well, my hope would be that AI really accelerates the way health systems can transform themselves from being these reactive care systems that wait for people to be sick before they address their needs, to become proactive, predictive, and ultimately even preventative, so that they can keep their populations healthy. That's how I see the future of AI, and we have a tremendous opportunity to live in this era and really change this now.
Thank you. Mohan?
Yeah, I think twofold. In the short term, as Anne said, so I'm really excited about the future. There is this kind of more enthusiasm toward process automation, and this covers all sorts of aspects from predictive maintenance, from designs, from all of kind of aspects within the engineering space. And there's the long term, which is kind of where I hope AI would be offered to help make a big difference, is in trying to solve some of the longest standing mathematical problems within the field of engineering. We have seen, some of these have been standing for hundreds of years, and with the availability of this massive amounts of data, I feel AI has something to contribute to offering a better understanding of physics, and therefore, kind of making a big difference in how we design the future systems.
All right. Chris, what's your view? And
even as an ex-prosecutor, I'm optimistic. I'd say that it's not a panacea, certainly. It is a little overhyped right now, but that hype, I think, will meet reality as we go forward. I think that humans are never going to disappear. Humans are going to be an integral part of AI and how it's controlled, and the ethical and other discussions. And the last thing I'd say is it's critically important that the folks who are on the front lines on the technology and the people who are dealing with policy talk more with each other, because the policies that are being made are going to affect both the research and deployment of these systems. And it's always a gap between those policymakers and the technology people. And we can't afford that with this.
Right. And in general, what do we see as well in the field is that there is people are likely to bring new technology. So it's not something they embrace faster. And it was mentioned prior, the automation factor, right? As long as automation is happening somewhere in a factory and so on, it's still fine. But when you speak about automating the decisions and so on, or to a certain extent, in general, those things, they tend to, to create some issues in the organization in the way they can be adopted. And I think that's one of the challenges I personally see in the last couple of years with new technologies appearing. So with this, I would like to thank you very much for this great discussion. I think, a lot of challenges we have from the data perspective, from security perspective, from how we apply this, what we call it, data-driven engineering. Yeah? And I just have a hope that the AI is just here to augment the human work. That's my hope.
Thanks a lot to all of you for the great discussion on our global stage. Now, there are some questions from the audience, and the first one, I think this is especially for Muhannad, and I will read that to you. What will be the evolution of societies and work with the development of AI and automation? Obviously, a lot of jobs might be replaced by AI. How this will impact society?
Excellent question. Thank you for that. And I guess, first of all, I would like to mention that Rolls-Royce have been at the forefront of considering the ethical aspect of how do we deploy AI within the company. We've actually just recently announced Alethea, so our CEO, Warren East, have announced this ethical framework for AI, which we kind of work by to ensure that AI does not actually have that negative impact on our workforce within Rolls-Royce. This kind of agreement has been discussed across the European Union, like with the European Union Parliament, to try and see how we could expand this notion of we need to make AI safe. So I understand the general kind of assumption or fear even from AI. However, being a technical person, having worked with AI for many years, I see this as a not an immediate danger. AI is at the current state is more of a tool than an actual intelligent entity that have this kind of significant threat over humanity. We tend to underestimate how intelligent kind of we are. I mean, consider the best, for example, just as an example, the state of the art in, for example, computer vision algorithm, which is one of the most studied areas in AI, can easily be beaten by a 4-year-old. I mean, this is the current state, and this is with all the computing power in the world. We're really behind. And there is this kind of I'm not sure how to describe it. There is this kind of inherent intelligence, this cognitive ability that humanities are blessed with, that is at this current state is almost impossible to replicate in a machine. So even you can teach a machine to distinguish between cats and dogs, for example, but you can't teach it what does a cat really mean. Like, how do you have emotions toward a cat or a dog? So this is why I would say, even though technically speaking, I don't see this as an immediate threat, but in parallel, we are working to ensure that this actually does not become a threat in the future by putting some sort of barriers to ensure that the safety of jobs and the workforces in the industry.
Thanks a lot, and I agree. I think this is definitely what we have to look for. There is one last question. Afterwards, we have to go on, and we will be trying to answer the questions or appoint the other questions to our speakers later on and come back to you guys on another format than with the answers. The next question, I would say, is probably more for Anne. What do you think is the fundamental reason why AI and ethics are so strongly intertwined?
Well, in medicine or medical care, it's not difficult to understand because it's truly a profession you have to apply with always the best possible intent. So the way you treat people's data in health is extremely sensitive. So that's why the ethical part has to be absolutely guaranteed. If you want to conduct further analysis on the data or you want to conduct clinical research with the data, it's absolutely a key factor already now. Without AI, the ethical review and the ethical approval of everything we would do with human-based data was very strictly regulated because of that. And I think that's explaining, in health at least, why it's so much intertwined. But I think I wanted to make just one point to most point that humans are not yet replaceable. I think so too. What we came to the conclusion in our report is that the human intelligence plus the artificial intelligence delivers much better outcomes because there is insufficiently capabilities around the world to address all the needs. So combining them both is the way forward, absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Anne, and we will be more than happy to share the report with our community. Thanks a lot to all of you. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our next keynote speaker, to Kay Firth Butterfield. Now, Kay, due to her commitments today, she kindly agreed to pre-record her speech with us. We met her online a couple of days ago. Kay is an incredible woman with passion for humankind and emerging technology. Please stay with us and watch her contribution to our event in the field of AI and ethics. Kay, you are the head of artificial intelligence and member of the executive committee at the World Economic Forum and are one of the foremost experts in the world of the governance of AI. You're a barrister, former judge, professor, technologist, and entrepreneur with great interest in humanity benefiting from AI. You're the world's first chief AI ethics officer in 2014 and created the AI ethics Twitter hashtag. We just love it. With putting AI and ethics into the center of attention, you today are going to talk about the AI trajectory in 2021 with respect to ethics. Kay,
absolutely.
A warm welcome, and our cognitive stage, it's our honor to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's an absolute honor and privilege to be here with you today. I want to look at the global outlook for AI in 2021. And of course, you know, I don't have a crystal ball, and nor do I have this great team of people who do studies and surveys if I were a consulting company. So instead, I'm going to talk about what I really know about, and that is AI governance and how I think that the governance of artificial intelligence will change and mature in 2021. So good governance is obviously something that both companies and countries have to think about. So just recently, by way of introduction, I spoke at an event with President Duque of Colombia, and his team very kindly wrote me a thank you note, which incorporated this statement: "Your contribution was essential to change the life of 50 million people." Well, that really makes you stop and think about the work that we're doing. AI ethics was just a handful of people in 2014 working on it. But now, fortunately, we are mainstream and important to everybody and listened to by everyone. So what I want to talk about today is what 2021 will bring in terms of the effect of AI on our lives for good and ill, and hopefully good. So first of all, regulation. I think we'll see out of Europe the first real nation state or uber nation state governance and regulation, particularly of high risk cases. We will certainly see the development of regulation in the high risk cases, such as human resources and facial recognition. And if you want some holiday reading, there will be a report out from the World Economic Forum, my team, in next week. And so there's some good holiday reading for you. And whilst I generally don't think that regulation of AI applications is a good idea, I do think that we have to think about the protection of citizens from the damaging uses of artificial intelligence in 2021. Also, we need to ensure when we use AI that we think of humans and human agency, and the fact that what we design in 2021, so what we design today, is actually our trajectory for tomorrow. So we need to ask today, what do we want our future to look like? And then we can design for the future today. One of the things that we're doing at the World Economic Forum is creating a positive futures piece of work. So bringing together governments and scientists and engineers and economists and sci-fi writers to think about, well, what does the best option for our future look like? And how do we get there? How do we create the policies that get us there? And also we should probably think about old people as an example of this. We could use AI to help old people remain in their homes and keep them safe from falling. We could litter their homes with AI listening devices, but actually there is a very easy way of monitoring falling and also having an alarm when actually the person has fallen and can't verbalize that. So next in 2021, I think we will think more about non-legislative, but nonetheless important governance of AI. So for example, in 2020, we created our procurement tool with the United Kingdom, and that work has now been piloted and used by the UAE, piloted by the World Bank, and also the Department of Defense in America. And I see that as something that will continue around the world in 2021. I also hope that 2021 will bring a name change. A very famous poet once said that a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. One of the things that I find in my work is that talking to young businesses and businesses outside Europe, we often find that the idea of ethics of AI or even responsible AI is actually something that they find quite difficult to get their head around. Whereas if we talk about the problems of artificial intelligence, then actually they can understand that. And whereas I would call bias an ethical challenge of AI, actually they would call it a problem. And I think that this is best expressed in a Gartner study, which shows that by 2022, unless we get a grip on the problems of bias in algorithms, 85% of those algorithms created will be erroneous. And so a problem is an ethical challenge, is a responsible AI. So let's call it what we think the name is that best helps us to bring about change. And so I think that in 2021, we must build trust with the general public. And I've been worrying about this for a while, but actually thinking, well, how do I reach the general public? But actually, we're all the general public. So when you are creating an algorithm, you should think about how would this affect me? How will this affect the person who lives next to me? If you don't like the idea of how it would affect you, then you've probably got it wrong, and you probably need to go back to the drawing board to engender trust. Because if I go back to that question or that statement about 50 million people affected in Colombia, actually there are millions of people affected around the world, or even billions. So think about how we can do better. And finally, I think it's important in 2021 to realize that everyone owns responsibility. So we need to come together and share what we know and share it out with other people who need to use it. Everybody owns responsibility for the AI system, from the board to the C-suite, to the tech people, to the whole company. And so more holiday reading for you. Just produced yesterday a first pass at how you actually think about organizational design for AI in your business, education of your employees, and product development. So lots to do in 2021. Thank you.
I would like to know now, before Christmas holiday, which book would you recommend listeners and why?
Okay, thank you. So I think that the reading of science fiction is actually quite important because when we think about what the future looks like, we have already got great examples of what the future might look like and what we want and what we don't want. So whilst I'm not suggesting that we all think about Terminator for AI, because fortunately we're not doing that anymore, I do think that some sci-fi really helps us have that insight into thinking about what the future would look like and how we want to achieve that or avoid it. So the book I'd recommend is a book called Iron Sunrise by a sci-fi writer called Charles Stross. Why would I recommend it? Well, it has a vision of what ungoverned abundance might look like. It also has some really important thoughts about governance and the growth of companies and the growth of international organizations and how we need to maintain balance between them. I think it's also a great example of how important how we shouldn't lose the idea of compassion and humans as we talk about the future and technology, and that need for empathy. And most importantly, something we need for 2021 and will need in the future, the ability to work together as human beings and share our ideas rather than feeling that you have to hold them close to your chest because they're your ideas. We need to share them for the benefit of the world.
Thanks a lot. And this is spot on what we're always saying. Why wait, act now and share for success. Why wait, act now and share for success. This is exactly what we're living for. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker, Dr. Louise Rosenberg. Jean-Philippe Sanrach from the Swiss Society of Virtual and Augmented Reality. And this is exactly what we love, share experience and network for mutual success. Thank you, Jean-Philippe, for connecting us to Louise. Louise, you are the CEO and Chief Scientist of Anonymous AI, a California-based company that uses AI to amplify the intelligence of networked human groups, enabling more accurate forecasts, decisions, and assessments. You earned your PhD from Stanford University and have worked as a tenured professor at California State University. And thanks to you, Louise, we have the great pleasure now to welcome Nicolas Hahn. Nicolas, you are a senior advisor to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. You lead a team dedicated to innovating with advanced technology and improve global food security analysis. You have been a global food security expert for over 25 years and are the principal creator of the global standard for classifying food insecurity used through the world, called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification. You also served as faculty chair of the Global Grand Challenges at Singularity University, where you have worked since 2012 as managing director of the Global Startup Program and vice president of Impact. Your passion belongs to exponential technology and breakthrough innovation to solve global challenges. Using AI for forecasting at United Nations, Louise and Nicolas, the stage is yours.
Thanks. So I am Louis Rosenberg, CEO of Unanimous AI, and we're a very different type of AI company in that while most AI efforts aim to replace human intelligence, we work to connect people together and amplify human intelligence. And so let me share my screen. And so today I'll be talking about using AI to amplify human insights. And I'm joined by Nick Hahn from the United Nations, who will talk about an exciting use case for the technology, forecasting food insecurity. And so just a quick outline about what I'll be talking about today. I'm going to start out talking about the technology itself, a technology called Swarm AI, which you may not have heard of, but it's a unique way to combine the benefits of human experts and artificial intelligence with the objective to amplify human expertise rather than replace human expertise. I'll talk about some validation studies that we did with various universities, Stanford, Oxford, and MIT. And then I will turn it over to Nick, who will talk about a specific use case at the United Nations at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, where the objective was to forecast food insecurity, and the method was to combine expert insights and AI technology. And so with that said, let me start with the technology, and let me start with a controversial statement in the world of AI, namely that people are smart. People are really smart. People have vast amounts of knowledge and wisdom and insight and intuition and instincts. I like to think of it as the human database. And the thing that I've been thinking about for the last 6 or 7 years is really, how can we best harness the intelligence of human groups? And to answer this question, my team at Unanimous AI started from the place of asking, well, how does nature do it? And it turns out that nature has evolved optimized methods for amplifying the intelligence of groups. And what nature does not do, nature does not take votes or polls or surveys. There's no survey monkey in nature. Nature also doesn't analyze big historical data sets. What nature does is form systems, real-time systems with feedback loops that enable groups to converge on optimal solutions. And biologists refer to this as swarm intelligence. And it's the reason why birds flock and fish school and bees swarm. They are significantly smarter together in a system than alone. And so the question that got me excited all those years ago was, well, if birds and bees and fish can get smarter by forming systems, why can't people do it? And it turns out that we can. And so here's a natural swarm. It's a school of fish. My team at Unanimous AI, we've spent years studying how natural swarms amplify the intelligence of these groups. And then we've developed algorithms and interfaces to allow humans to form similar swarms online. And so this is a human swarm. It is over 100 people connected from all around the world. Each of those little magnets you see is controlled by a person using their mouse or their touch screen or their phone. And what they're doing is they're interacting in real time, pushing and pulling on the system, while AI algorithms are watching all of their behaviors in real time and determining how the swarm should move. And so a swarm is a real-time system with participants acting and reacting and interacting, revealing the strength of their convictions to the underlying algorithms and allowing them to converge on solutions. The question thus is, well, does it work? And as I mentioned, we've worked with universities around the world to study the results of making these human distributed swarms. And so here's results of, we did a study with MIT that was a 20-week study of financial forecasting, where we had groups of financial traders forecast the price of gold, the price of oil, and the S&P 500 every week for 20 consecutive weeks. And they did that alone as individuals. They did that by taking a vote, and they also did that by forming a swarm AI intelligence. And when they made these forecasts as a swarm, we amplified their accuracy by 26%. So very significant improvement. And all of these results, I should mention, are published papers that you can find on our website. We also published a study last year with Stanford University Medical School in the Nature journal, in the journal Nature Digital Medicine, where we looked at groups of doctors making diagnoses. And here we had X-rays would pop up on the screens of a handful of doctors all at different locations, and they would make their diagnosis either alone or by taking a vote or by working together as a swarm intelligence. And what we found is when they worked together as a swarm intelligence, we reduced their diagnostic errors by 33%. So very significant improvement. We published a study also last year with Oxford University looking at forecasting sporting events. And so we had groups of sports fans log into our system and predict 50 professional soccer games over a period of 5 weeks. the individuals were 55% accurate. If those same individuals just took a vote, they were 58% accurate. So they did get smarter. There is some wisdom in the crowds, but a swarm is significantly smarter. They were 72% accurate when working together as a swarm. And finally, we did a study with California Polytechnic looking at business teams. We had 60 business teams take a subjective judgment test alone or as a vote or as a swarm. When they worked as a voting, they reduced their errors by 9%. So again, crowds are smart. But when they work together as a swarm AI, they reduced their errors by 52%. So significant improvement. And again, this is what we see again and again. And so what swarm AI is a method where we take a networked human group, a group that has knowledge and wisdom and insight and intuition. We connect them together with AI in real time so they can function as an artificial expert and make more accurate forecasts and insights and estimations and decisions. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick to talk about the project at the United Nations. And go ahead.
Thank you, Luis. Hello, everyone. So as I was introduced, I'm a senior advisor with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, but I represent a multi-agency group. You can see all their logos down there below, which is a global body called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification that classifies the severity of food insecurity around the world, particularly countries where there's acute food insecurity on a scale from phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, phase 5 being famine, and phase 1 being everything is okay. You might think that we know who, where, when people are food insecure in the world, but actually we don't. I'm in the core of this business. I've been doing it for over 25 years, and we still have difficulties not only knowing what's happening currently in some parts of the world, but forecasting. And the reason why we have difficulties is because food security at the household level is an inherently massively complex endeavor. It involves dozens of variables ranging from climatic conditions to shocks like drought or tsunamis or COVID-19, to agricultural conditions, market prices, to nutrition data, mortality data, et cetera, et cetera. So it's dozens of variables that we have to collect the data on and assimilate and make sense of in terms of our standard reference table for classifying phase 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. The state of the art right now is this IPC, whereby we literally bring the evidence together around a table, or at least it used to be before COVID-19, now it's virtual, and we discuss and debate the evidence amongst experts until they have a discussion and they agree on the consensus for what the classification is. But that process is it's time consuming and it's prone to bias in terms of the quote loudest voice in the room dynamic, and it's costly as well. So therefore we decided that we would embark on an exploration of artificial swarm intelligence, and we engaged Unanimous AI to help us prototype this new technology for IPC. Next slide. So we have two big challenges. One, we have a massive data management challenge, of which we're not addressing with Unanimous AI and artificial swarm intelligence, but we also have an analysis challenge. And that's specifically trying to improve the consensus building efficiency, time, and human resources requirement to allow us to do the quality, scalability, and frequency of updating food security analysis in dozens up to 100 countries around the world. Next slide. So we put together a research methodology asking these 5 questions. Does a group reach similar classifications using the traditional IPC method and the artificial swarm intelligence method? Question B, do 2 independent groups come to similar classifications, both using artificial swarm intelligence with the same data? Question C, do 2 independent groups come to similar classifications results with traditional way of doing it and artificial swarm intelligence? Also, how does artificial swarm intelligence classification compare to other agencies' forecasts? And then what are people's perceptions? We did this in 2 different pilots, one in Haiti, one in Malawi, and actually we since added a 3rd one in South Africa. We did swarms with the support of Unanimous AI. Sometimes the swarms had only just a few members, like 5 members, and we did upwards, I think our largest swarm was about 45 members. The process that we went through is once we formed the swarm, and a swarm are basically experts in the food security world. These might be agriculturalists, nutritionists, agronomists, etc. We onboarded them. We had a evidence review stage, a discussion stage, and then we engaged the Unanimous AI platform specifically on the decision-making stage. Next slide. Luis, next slide, please.
I did it.
You did it? Uh-oh. We have a little lag time then. You have advanced and I don't see it. Okay. So I think I'll just keep talking through it. So basically the results were not, well, one thing I should mention, in the food security forecasting world, unlike say sports outcomes, we do not have a definitive source of truth in our forecasts. We'll predict 6 months in advance what we think is going to happen. However, by the very nature of our food security prediction will change the amount of humanitarian response that happens, et cetera. So we never actually really have a true outcome. What we're comparing right now is what the traditional method does and what the artificial swarm intelligence method does. And the results, unfortunately, they're not on my screen. Luis, or one of the organizers, can you confirm if the guests can see the screen? Because I can't. Right. So I think we just go on ahead. So the results were not entirely conclusive, but very strongly in support of artificial swarm intelligence being able to do the job of the traditional way of doing things, but actually much better in terms of efficiency, time efficiency. We had the 2 groups did the analyses in Haiti and Malawi. We had the artificial swarm intelligence from the normal way of doing things, and we had the analysis done with the normal way of doing things and with artificial swarm intelligence, and it matched very strongly in Haiti. It didn't match exactly in Malawi, but we actually suspect that the artificial swarm intelligence might have gotten it more correct than the traditional way of doing things. And we also compared with other forecast systems and other indicators. And there too, the artificial swarm intelligence came out very strong in terms of aligning with what we think the right response would have been. Luis, you're not able to, you're advancing the slides, but it's not advancing on my slide, my side, just to let you know.
Yeah, it's on results 3 of 3.
Okay. Then I'll pick up right there. So results 3 of 3. Let's pick up right there. Apologies everyone for the slide issue there. And this is really what it comes down to is the perception of our participants had both positive and negative, but mostly positive in terms of the use of artificial swarm intelligence. Number one, they appreciated the anonymity of the process. When you're doing food security analysis, oftentimes, especially if you're talking about places which might be in famine, there are strong political dynamics that can bias the analysts from doing their work and that can bias people from speaking up. So the anonymity of the process strengthened the results. The decision-making using artificial swarm intelligence allowed us to drive to clear results in a very short period of time. It was quick and interactive. It allows for intuitive negotiation because you can see in real time how other swarm members are behaving, and allows for visualization. The participant, The participants did mention that there is a risk to delink the evidence from the decision, and there was still some confusion around how this is different from voting, although we did our very best to explain that it is very different. There's also a difference between reaching consensus and building consensus. Artificial swarm intelligence is very good at reaching consensus, but building consensus required more discussion and iteration from the group members. And then if you could hit the next slide and last slide. Overall conclusion, we feel that artificial swarm intelligence has very high potential to improve food security forecasting, making it faster, cheaper, more inclusive, and more rigorous. And we are embarking on further piloting and experimenting with new protocols to improve the process. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Luis and Nicola, for this interesting use case about swarm AI. I would like to have one question. The others we won't be able to take care of, and therefore I would like to ask you as speakers, as well as people from the audience who are interested, to go backstage and have further discussions. Now, the one question I would like to ask is, more explainable than deep learning methods or easier to make explainable?
So you're asking if this AI method is less of a black box than, say, deep learning, and the answer is yes. And one of the interesting things is that when we do when we take on a project, whether it's this UN food insecurity project or a project like radiology, it's the same exact software. We're not training an AI about food insecurity. We're not training an AI about radiology. We're not training an AI about playing soccer. What we're doing instead is we're training an AI about human behaviors. And so our system has, we've had hundreds of thousands of people answer questions as swarms. The AI has studied all these different behaviors so it can understand what different behaviors mean in terms of the variations of confidence and conviction that different people have. And so there's not this black box about specific content. There's instead a training method where the AI understands how to look at a group behavior and combine people's knowledge and wisdom and insight in a very efficient way. And so the answers that we reach are generally very explicit. They're not. There's not a big surprise at the end like you might have in a deep learning system.
Thanks a lot for this insight. And actually, what I was just thinking, swarm intelligence, swarm AI, we do have a huge and great AI community. Perhaps this is something we have to think about to collaborate for the AI for good. Thanks a lot. With that, now I would like to introduce you to our collaboration panel, which will be moderated by the AI expert, Richard Foster Fletcher, who has vast experience in moderating. Richard, you are an AI advisor and speaker. You are the founder of, NeuralPath.io, a human-centric AI advisory practice, chair of MKAI, and host of the Boundless podcast. You regularly speak about AI innovation, ethics, and the future of work for leading institutions, including Henley Business School, UCL, LSE, and Trent University. You have collaborated with the UN Environmental Programme to support the AI and digital transformation journey via your podcast. On your panel, we will have Oluwayo. You have been recognized as one of the top 100 global innovators in data and analytics by Corinium Intelligence. You wrote the first AI book for kids in Africa and leads the fastest growing AI learning and solution delivery community in Africa, Data Science Nigeria. You're Chief Transformation Officer at MTN, Africa's biggest telecommunication operator. With you, we do have Alexandra. Alexandra, you are Vice Rector at Kominsky University, associate professor at the Leon Kosminski Academy, and the leader of AI in Management program. In autumn 2020, you started research in the American Institute for Economic Research on the automation of work and joined the Labor and Work-Life program at Howard University. You're interested in the development of new technologies, natural language processing, humanoid AI, social robots, and wearables technology. Additionally, we have Vincent. You are a technology advisor at the International Committee of the Red Cross. You focus on the adoption of new technologies in the humanitarian sector with a strong emphasis on privacy, security, and ethics in general. You are often quoted saying that protecting personal data is about protecting people. Additionally, we have Domingo. You are an AI entrepreneur and the managing director of the international AI firm Expert.ai in Switzerland. For the past 10 years, you have been focused on AI. You have a vast experience in industries such as education, HR, finance, and innovation. You hold a master in AI and an MBA and MA in linguistics. For you, it's clear. AI goes beyond technology. Richard, I am handing over to you, please. Again, we are looking how we can get Richard on board. We can't hear him yet. As you all know, these technical issues just belong to our daily life. At least this always gives me the good feeling of we remain human. At least there we can rely on each other.
Yes, can I be heard? Is it all right? All right, perfect. But I cannot hear Richard, unfortunately.
Vielleicht muss die Dings rausnehmen.
So,
Andi, ja. Vielleicht muss das Headset ausstecken und mit dem Mikrofon vom.
So, but I thought it was a panel and that Richard sent us his questions. And I see here that the scheduled order is that Domingo speaks first and then there is a question to me.
Yeah. Well, if you want to somehow, Richard, with your permission, I'm going to rephrase what we were talking some days ago. I think there was an interest about companies focused on securing, harnessing big data to make data-driven decisions and also derive insights from those data. So how this is going to be in 2021? Pretty much, I think it's like the old song. Instead of love is in the air, data is in the air. Nonetheless, I think let's take a critical approach. I think on the one hand, is it true that companies are taking data-driven decisions through artificial intelligence models? Humbly, I don't think so. According to Gartner, only about 30% of companies use artificial intelligence in their core business. Being crystal clear, artificial intelligence is not yet part of our lives. And I think we must democratize its use. It is a revolution that is pending to be done. On the other hand, indeed, we have data, and not happy with that, we can even create synthetic data in order to train our algorithms. However, is it a matter of quantity or quality? We should not get confused. I think data per se is almost nothing. Knowledge, which is information processed, is something. Wisdom, which is knowledge enriched by thousands of years of human cognitive evolution, is the aim. The forecast for 2021 is that we are going to keep on gathering exabytes of data, but we must strive at curating those data, bringing order to them, for instance, through knowledge graphs. Maybe to avoid what John Naisbitt stated in his book, Megatrends, many years ago. We are drowning in information, but starved for knowledge. So now, Alexandra, if,
Yeah, I will be happy to take over since Richard is still missing. I would tend to agree with you, Domingo, in stating that artificial intelligence is definitely not mainstream yet. We see more functionalities. We definitely see more courage on the side of various organizations that are trying to implement AI. Sometimes they tend to implement more simple techniques like, classical approaches to machine learning, let's say regression, to handle their own data for prediction's sake or for other types of goals. But indeed, I think we are at a very nascent phase of these developments. And that is obviously also linked with the question that was posed by Richard to us earlier on, is data the new oil? Because I believe obviously data is the new oil. Not everybody has full access to this new oil, and that's obviously a major question now. We see that at the level of European Union, there are various discussions about open data pools where medium-sized companies and small companies could also benefit from different types of data and could feed their engines with that type of data that they very often miss, right, or that they cannot purchase for various reasons or access. So I do believe that it's a very relevant issue. Another is what is the quality of that data, right? So I think some sort of internal inspection of the quality of data is something that is a step one towards a good usage of artificial intelligence within the company. And well, perhaps more thought-provokingly, I would say that a big question to ask is for how long will data be or constitute that unfair advantage for companies? Because in the future, we may see that, there will be a huge flood of data, and the question will be how to actually gain value, right? How to make it smart data and not just big data, right? That floods everywhere, and even though you have access to it, you actually don't gain any conclusions or any insights through that data. So I think that matters a lot as well. And who knows, perhaps in the future, various advanced methods of processing that data, of analyzing that data will actually constitute that core advantage, or maybe quantum computers will. So systems that can handle huge piles of data in a very rapid time. So I do believe that currently data is the new oil. However, perhaps this big data paradigm in some time, I don't know, short-term, mid-term perspective will not be valid anymore, or it will be kind of transformed into something else. So yeah, that's something I want to come. Yeah, thank you so much. So handling to the next one then.
Okay, thank you. I think it's my turn. So the topic here that Richard was interested in knowing was the relationship between the need of regulating AI in a way versus the self-regulation that some companies have put together with AI ethical board. So I think the answer whether ethical board are useful is both yes and no, because on one end, it did contribute a lot to socialize the challenge and the issues around the ethical use of AI. And it helped really the community to acknowledge really that there is a challenge and that we have to invest into solving it, or at least to work toward a bit more ethic. Now, at the same time, we've seen various successes in these initiatives from private and tech companies. There was last year a major AI providers that set up a ethical board that survived barely 2 weeks before being dismantled. And more recently, there was quite a big story up in the AI community around the departures of Dr. Timnit Gebru at Google. So there is a recognition, it's useful, and we do socialize. Now, recognizing is not acknowledging, and at the same time, that's why the answer is also no. Self-regulation and ethical board is not sufficient. There is definitely a need for a formal regulation, because self-regulation does not satisfy any of the parties. The simple questions around liability for, let's say, a bad decision made by a machine. Is it liability of the developer, the supplier, or even the customer that bought the solution and perhaps harmed the end user? So over history, I think, and I'm not a lawyer here, but I think regulation happens in domains where the importance and impact on society is sufficient for that we decide as again a society to put a certain quality control to that domain. So regulation here in AI should follow the same path, I think. Now, it's a complex topic, and I by far not have the ambition to have the answer. But within my sector, the humanitarian sector, we have a certain experience in working with principles. We have independence principle, we have neutrality, and we have an overarching concept that we call doing no harm whenever we do provide humanitarian services. And we think as well collectively that trust is absolutely mandatory to deliver the services, and that you only gain trust when you comply with your principle that I just mentioned. That can be done with code of conduct, that can be done with different frameworks, because we don't really have regulation, of course, in that sense. But to end the point of the importance of regulation, I see, for example, perhaps a low-hanging fruit for it around a data set. The data set we use either to train ML, or in particular to train ML machine learning algorithms. There should be some regulations to force a proper description, to help people prescribing the limitations of the use, the applicability of the algorithms, and of course the source of the data, and whenever it contains personal data, a mechanism by which you can propagate the consent for the reuse. Thanks.
Unless I'm greatly mistaken, I think you might be able to hear me.
Great.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, indeed.
It's very good to be here. So you can test your audio all you want, and you can do the test call all you want. It doesn't mean it's going to work when you log in. Thank you so much for getting started and getting this panel going in my absence. Vincent, I have to admire your dress, of course. We seem to be wearing exactly the same outfit, so that's fun as well. And it's great to see you back here. So you've made a start, and we've jumped in with the questions that I sent beforehand. And we're moving into 2021. If we haven't learned from 2020, wow, something has gone wrong this year in adaptability and in trust. Vincent, I was picking up on the end of what you said there. Do you think there's other industries we can learn from when it comes to trust, perhaps banking or other areas?
Probably. I'm not sure it's the same kind of trust, but there's definitely something to be learned from independent and, again, neutral elements. So banks are not typically classically independent and neutral. So it's, again, a yes and no. Yes in the forms of, I guess, the systems you put in place to guarantee trust in terms of security and so forth. But the real trust, the one that you say, when you hear a name or when you see a logo, you kind of say, I know these guys are not trying to sell me sort of crap, sorry my French, but this is a bit different. And I think civil society, NGOs and humanitarian sectors in particular might be one of the best places you can shop from.
Yes, there's so much we can do. I feel like this might be the year when AI companies, tech companies come out of the shadows and decide to trust that innovation will take them as far as they need to go with data ethics. Bayo, I wanted to ask you about collaboration, the focus of our panel. There's this idea that AI projects don't scale. 70% of them, in fact, are listed at that. And sometimes the finger gets pointed at biases in the data, even gender imbalances in the industry, a lack of diversity, and narrow perspectives. Looking ahead to next year, can we get AI to be more inclusive? Is it still too elitist?
Thank you very much, Richard, for the question. I think in the theme or the context of collaboration, we must all understand that number one, the whole issue of prejudice in AI, as far as bias is concerned, is because biased algorithms learn from biased data. If the data that we use are not representative, if there are imbalances in the data, if there are no deliberate collaboration, inclusiveness, and a high sense of fairness and accountability in how we bring data together, there will always be distortion, which leads to discrimination and a lot of social consequences. I'm sure many of us will still be very familiar with the gender imbalance data that was used to build the algorithm, recruitment algorithm of a leading e-commerce firm, where it was realized that it was biased against women. And the reason was simple. The algorithm was built based on number of data sets in terms of resume submitted over the last 10 years. And since most of the applicants were men, it was trained to favor men over women. So as we move into 2021, there must be a deliberate effort to disaggregate data for representativeness. And of course, like Vincent said, we must also be accountable in detailing the sources of the data, the process of collecting the data, and how the data should be used. Interesting, there was a work done by Dr. Tina Gabriel, which she called Data Sheet for Dataset, which is an attempt to document sources and a form of guidance, like like a worksheet on how data should be used. As we move into 2021, we must also be very intentional and be aware of a lot of stereotypical human errors, group attribution errors, and a lot of overgeneralizations, especially when you look at a lot of tools that exist today, Compact, and many of them. So it's a reality. And for me, there are three rules of thumb as we go into 2021. As practitioners, let's ask ourselves questions. Number one, is this practice lawful? Does it respect all applicable laws and regulations, both written and unwritten? Number two, is it ethical? Does it respect ethical principles and values? And lastly, which is from a technical perspective, is it robust in terms of inclusiveness? And as I wrap up, there's a lot to learn from a lot of emerging tools that we have today to support debiasing our data. Things like AI Ethic Toolkit from Intel, AI Fairness 360 from IBM, What If tool from Google, Microsoft Fair Learning, Azure Machine Learning. We must be intentional as we move into 2021 to bring everyone into the table by respecting the data and making sure that every model is interpretive in terms of fairness, responsibility, and high-level accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Bayo. Appreciate that. Domingo, let me come back to you and ask you, because what Bayo's talking about there is being able to speak the same language. And that's still a really big problem, even just within companies and their different silos of information and departments. Language has been in the news this year, OpenAI with GPT-3 and the open testing of that. And I know your company is very focused on this area, things like natural language and NLP. But looking ahead, what are the opportunities for people to collaborate with these tools and platforms for them to actually increase not just productivity, but creativity as well?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. I think indeed these open platforms are great initiatives in order to try to advance in a joint and common effort in the field of NLP, natural language processing. Nonetheless, and please let me dive just a bit deeper in the natural language processing realm. Language is a round thing, sometimes too complex to be just understood following a mathematical, statistical approach, as is mostly the case with these open platforms. As Yann LeCun, Facebook Chief Artificial Intelligence Scientist, stated concerning GPT-3 last October, trying to build intelligent machines by scaling up language models is like building high altitude airplanes to go to the moon. You might beat altitude records, but going to the moon requires a completely different approach. Although it might sound a little bit weird and surprising for some data scientists, the successful use of machine learning techniques to tackle the problem of natural language processing is based on the work of the American philologist George Kingsley Tsip. Tsip analyzed the frequency distribution of certain terms and words in several languages, enunciating the law named after him in the 40s of the last century. Nonetheless, our languages are not at all pure statistical distributions. Semantics play a paramount role. And from my humble point of view, I think the hybrid approach, blending the symbolic and also the mathematical and statistical approaches, is the ideal to cope with natural language processing. Nowadays, there are already some companies which have open collaborative NLP platforms, having embedded in them machine learning, deep learning, ontologies, and computational linguistics. I think this hybrid approach will take us much, much further.
Thank you very much. Alexandra, moving to yourself. Hybrid is such a key word, and I think many of us have been thrown for years just by trying to understand what the word artificial actually means and intelligence actually means. And AI as an acronym can also be used for augmented intelligence. With hybrid in mind, what examples of human-machine interaction are we going to see emerging next year and beyond?
Thank you so much, Richard. Well, I do tend to agree. I was also kind of shocked how well, let's say, encoders can work for language, for text generation. And I think we've seen those pretty holistic platforms like GPT-3 or BERT really, showing us the next, frontier of communication, of feature extraction, of really contextualized comprehension of, what's being uttered. And that's a big deal, I think. And I'm very excited to see what's going to happen next. But in the context of communication with such systems and other systems, I think what matters a lot is this collaborative touch. So what I would personally like to see, and this is something I'm investigating also a lot these days, is systems that are specifically designed for collaboration with humans or enhance human cognitive capacities, for instance. So not necessarily systems that kind of replace humans, not necessarily systems that kind of, mimic humans and try to be like humans, but some sort of systems that can be really helpful. And we've recently researched work environments, knowledge work, and it turned out that for different managers, actually, with whom we've spoken, but we also have done some other experiments with them, they have very different needs when it comes to systems that they would like to have in their specific profession. So we need more granular systems, and I think we need more personalized approaches. And we also need systems that can actually help someone in their work. If somebody wants to have help in budgeting, for instance, in a project, then they should get that kind of help. If somebody wants an assistant that's going to call clients, this is the type of system that should be built. So I do believe that in communication, we should kind of go beyond this holy grail of Turing test and start thinking about practical tools that can help us out, because they can be very powerful in that. So I think more granularity, more personalized approach, and also perhaps taking people on board and allowing them to co-create these tools, so co-produce it in a way, so that they can feel empowered to use them later on and do not feel discouraged to use systems that they just don't know and that have been designed for them up front. So I would say that matters also.
You're in mute.
There is no voice.
Okay, I was taken onto mute covertly without me realizing. That's not a problem. You talked about data sharing earlier, and Rosa Mombaza from the UN talked about the huge power in this data when we can unlock it and share it across systems and people. Vincent, I'd love to hear more about that from your perspective in the ICRC. I would have thought partnerships vital to your work. What sort of data or AI partnerships have you spun up, and how have they helped you?
Yeah, that's a great question, and indeed we are quite looking at spending some time and energy looking at how we can do that data collaboration. Now, most of the time, data collaboration means we put our data set together and we do some processing, computing on top of, and that's all good for everyone. Now, the thing is, I understand it more as it is the transaction that allows two or more entities really to get the value of the data when it's shared, but it doesn't mean you actually have to share the data, right? It might be more on a command and result type of models where, I want to search that trove of data. I need to have a result, but at the core of it, again, it's the result or it's the result ultimately that is important, not to get access to the data, right? Except if the system requires it, but in general, or in theory, at least, you don't need that. The reason, I guess, you don't always want to share data is because you have data breach in the broader sense. So it might be in a private sector more, if I lose my competitive edge because my data is known by a competitor, it might be my IP, it might be my list of prospects, or God knows what, but you lose some kind of value that you think your data have, even though you'd like to be computing it together with some of your peers or competitors. Now, in our case, of course, it's different because the data breach would really put, already most vulnerable people more at risk even, and that's more a question of life or death if that data is really out there. If we look at the latest advances in technology, I think there are some, good pieces and avenues to explore. So there is all the people or the teams that are working on multi-party computing or secure computing in general. So places where you do bring your data, they're super encrypted before you compute the things, and you never really reveal it in clear text. A second is probably in the more cryptographic domains with homomorphic. Now these advances and these cutting-edge technologies are not ready yet, I think, for prime time. But I think it's really worth investing a lot more. And we see large providers, large companies investing for that. So as a takeaway of the question, I think that we need to look at searching for things without sharing data. And typically at the ICRC, that's an area we are investing in. Thank you.
Vincent, thank you. Data sharing, obviously the privacy angle is one of the hardest to overcome, but Bayo, coming to you again finally to take us home today. You had to overcome that with MTN, with one of the projects that you worked on around COVID, and you have this massive network, 75 million users across your country. Tell us, what did you do to be able to partner and make a real change during that period?
Thank you. I think generally and across the world, COVID-19 management is perhaps one of the most important case studies of collaboration within the broader AI ecosystem. We saw it was used in contact tracing, in medical diagnostics, prediction, managing people, resource allocation. For us in Africa, particularly the largest country in Africa, where data points are largely disaggregate, they're all over the place in terms of data being owned by different entities in silos. So for us to be able to apply data to make informed decision, it was clear there must be collaboration. Of course, collaboration must be within the confines of the respect of the privacy of the data owners. Issues of data aggregation, anonymization, de-identification were critical. Of course, there's GDPR that were also providing the boundaries. So what was the problem? So the issue is we need to bring together experts in various domains. We are experts in telecom, so we understand mobility, but we cannot make sense of the mobility data if epidemiologists and health experts do not interpret it. And of course, there are geospatial experts who also make sense of those migration in terms of the social dynamics of it. Of course, COVID was not just an health problem, it was also an economic problem. So there are also economics who understand that. So what we did was to bring together different partners and expertise to be able to bring our best of breed together, to understand the risk, the pattern, and of course to support the government in terms of preparedness, resources, and of course to help the vulnerable people as a result of the first lockdown, because to provide some economic support and of course algorithmic optimization of scarce resources. So at the end of the day, we are able to guide, predict, support, and demonstrate the power of when all partners come together to share data or share expertise is always at the benefit of the people, which validates our starting point that at all times, AI is about people and our welfare. Thank you.
What a fantastic place to finish. Absolutely. People first, people before problems. Thank you so very, very much, everybody today, for contributing, for preparing, and for supporting this panel. It means the world to us.
Thanks a lot to all of you, and especially thanks that you were so spontaneously and overcome this technical issues that we had. And honestly, what I was thinking, listening to how we try to solve altogether this problem is, will AI be able to actually jump in spontaneously and react as you guys just did? I'm not so sure. And I think also it's not going to be as fun as what we have all together. Now, thanks to all of you. Again, please join backstage, especially those guys from the community having questions. We're so sorry we can't answer them now. You can go backstage and exchange with the experts. And additionally, we will try to come up with the answers after the event in another format. Now, I would like to welcome our next keynote speaker, Brett Greenstein. Brett, you are Senior Vice President and Global Market Head of AI and Analytics at Cognizant Digital Business. You're a leader in AI and data, applying them to drive digital transformation across industries. You're a passionate innovator and business leaders who delivers business growth, accelerates new technology, and transforms his clients and organizations. You are a powerful and effective communicator who inspires organizations and delivers clear messages to the market. A did at work across cultures and with clients from the largest enterprises to smallest, most nimble startups. AI to solve global issues in 2021 and beyond. Brett, the virtual stage is yours. Thanks.
Thank you. For all of us who are here today, we're all here because we have a passion for artificial intelligence. We're all here because at some point in our lives, we watched science fiction, we read a book, we dreamed about the potential of this. For me, it was in 7th grade when my teacher came into class. He had seen a computer, which was still pretty new back then. And he told us that he walked up to it, it asked, "What is your name?" on the screen. He typed Ted, and it said, "Hi, Ted." And I was kind of blown away at the idea that a machine could learn and remember something as simplistic as that was, and that sometime in my career, AI would not be science fiction, it would just be science, data science. It would be things we could use. And it inspired me on a path that brought us all here together today. AI is certainly here now. It's here in business. It's here actually in every aspect of our lives. If you look at your phone, the websites that recommend things to you. If you talk to a device in your home, I can't say the names of a device because I have them in my office and they'll respond. But voice control, self-driving cars, hyper-personalization of web experiences, ads, certainly mobile and images and cameras. These are all AI in our lives right now. So this is amazing, right? It's amazing for us as technologists and as passionate people in the world of AI. But other things from science fiction also happened, especially in the last year, between the pandemic, global unrest, environmental impacts, all things that we've read about as well. And they actually demand more of us and are also one of the drivers of the adoption of technology here at a speed we haven't been at before. So 2020, obviously we all know what we're going through in 2020. But more importantly, there are things coming to the rescue. In addition to the medical improvements that are coming, there's approaches in data and AI and technology that are helping. Cloud adoption was on a pretty strong path before the pandemic. During the pandemic, cloud adoption accelerated dramatically. In part, this was companies working to figure out how to mitigate disaster recovery plans, or to have more flexible environments, certainly to lower the fixed costs, the capital costs of infrastructure, servers and data centers and things like that. But what we experienced was companies all around the world moving from long-term generalized cloud migration journeys to quick, agile sprints, moving critical pieces of infrastructure, critical sources of data onto the cloud. In addition, during 2020, AI continues to move into production capabilities. What we see is a lot of experimentation and work that happened in 2018 and 2019, moving into production use cases in risk, in business operations, in business, with enhancements to just the cloud platforms and technology, but also ML ops, data ops, and other technologies that help productionize and scale AI. So I'm pretty excited that at least technology has risen to the challenge. During this time, we did a lot of market studies. I spent a lot of time with clients, and it was pretty clear that the chaos that came with a pandemic exposed all the weaknesses in the way that people managed and looked at data and the way they made decisions. The first thing that was obvious was that people did not have the right data to make decisions in a highly chaotic time. If you consider how rapidly things changed, and also how locally they changed, how different it is in New York or Texas or California or the UK or Sweden or anywhere else, the differences are quite varied. And so understanding those differences turned out to be a weak spot in most businesses. It also turns out that almost every forecast model that companies used, especially those aimed at consumers, are wrong now because human behavior changed. Entire countries ran out of toilet paper. All of us were scrambling to find resources. It was chaos, and supply-demand systems failed. So we spent most of 2020 helping companies to move data to the cloud and make data accessible, to bring in other data that was useful that they didn't have today, so they could make better decisions, and to update those forecast models from traditional, very linear algebraic predictions based on history to dynamic machine learning-based models that adapted to changes in location, changes in conditions around us, changes in numbers of cases and things like that, so that consumer-facing companies had a better shot at predicting demand, converting customers, protecting revenue, saving jobs. These were all critical issues in 2020. Now, also during this year, we got curious. When you have data scientists in your team, and they look at a problem like a pandemic, they see something more than just supply-demand forecasting. They see patterns in data. So early in end of first quarter, beginning of second quarter, Oxford began publishing a huge data set on numbers of cases, but also the policies being implemented at each country, and then later at each state in the United States, to see the policy decisions people were making to help mitigate the spread of COVID. And our data scientists looked at that and realized they could do something with it. So they began studying it, looking first whether they could create predictive models. And then they applied what's called evolutionary AI, and they were able to create prescriptive models. They could look at any location around the world every single day, because the data is updated constantly, and determine which things will have the most impact on reducing the number of cases. Would it be closing schools, closing work, enforcing social distancing, information campaigns, things like this? And every location is different, and every day it's different. And the factors that mattered most changed over time. And looking at this kind of data at first was kind of dark, because what it told us, especially in April and May, was that we were going to have to shut down work and school around the world for a long period of time. And that was a pretty heavy thing to look at, to think about. But then very quickly, as the data filled in, the models improved, you began to see variations. And it was the variations that I thought were so cool, because now you could see some countries responding better to mitigation strategies. You could see how some things had effect more than others. For example, there were places that could relax school rules, other places that had to be very strictly locked down. And we took all of that information, we took the models and the AI that we did, and we published it on the web. We put it freely available for everyone. It's out there now on evolution.ml, and anyone can look at it, look at your country, look at your state, if you're in the United States, and see what's coming, and also see what actions you could take, or at least policymakers could take, to reduce the impact of the pandemic. We've shared this with clients. We've shared this publicly on the web. We've documented in technical papers. It inspired a lot of people to come together, and ultimately led us to participate with the X Prize and to create a competition to make even better models. And now there's over 340 teams around the world all signed up to compete as part of the X Prize, using this kind of approach to use data and AI for good, to use it to help predict and prescribe what people should do to respond in a time of a pandemic. And even as the vaccine comes out, it will be variable in its impact. It will be variable in its adoption. And those are the times when you need to have the best models to make really precise, fast decisions. So I'm encouraged that even in a time of crisis, the technologies rose up, whether it was cloud, AI technologies, teams came together, data scientists, leaders around the world to contribute, and all of it elevated urgency among businesses to accelerate their investments and their adoption of AI and data on the cloud much more. So what does all this mean? You know, we're getting through 2020. We're obviously all hopeful we're on the other side of what was a really tough time. But we've learned things through this. We've learned that the world is certainly more chaotic and filled with change and uncertainty than it has been in the past. And in all likelihood is going to continue that way. We also have spent a long enough time now operating in new ways. I talked to a company that does home improvement supplies, and this was in December 2019. And the first thing they told me was that they do a forecast model for all their stores 13 weeks in advance. And they push it out through their various stakeholders out to the stores, who then order things 13 weeks ahead of time. I can't imagine that worked particularly well during a pandemic when decisions had to be made daily and hourly to adapt to changing conditions. And as companies adapted and moved from monthly, quarterly, monthly, even weekly decision making to daily and hourly and continuous, that is not going to go away. That has created a competitive advantage for people who are faster, better able to use data, better able to use AI. And that's not going to go away. That is the way people will run. And so I think what we've all learned is that it's not that we can make better decisions with AI and data, it's that we have to. It's a competitive urgency for us to do this. And now that we've learned how to do it, as companies, as individuals, it is not going to go away. It becomes the new normal. It'll actually be considered a form of malpractice to not consult an AI on really hard decisions. Human beings make on average 35,000 decisions a day. Most of them are not important, you know, which shoe to put on, but many of them are in business. And we also are only able to optimize over 2 or 3 parameters at most. And how much data can we look at without getting confused? AI helps us sort through that data. It helps us optimize over more parameters and informs us so we can make better decisions. I think what is really changing is that the people who use AI for business are replacing those who don't. And they're using it for supply demand planning. They're using it for personalization, whether it's a web experience, ads, or anything else. Customer service, for example. They're using it to understand new forms of data that are now critical to business. Images, video, natural language, understanding the customer feedback that you're getting, understand what's being said in social media about your company, your brand, or your product, understanding candidates who want to work for you better using NLP to better understand what they describe as their background and how that might match the needs of your business. They're also using it for automation and augmentation, whether it's automating things like contact centers and adding self-service and conversational AI, to augmenting decision-making by providing insights, prescriptive guidance to make better decisions. And of course, they're using AI to optimize, to balance not just 2 or 3 parameters, but to look across pricing and revenue and customer sat and margin and safety and risk and environmental impact and make the best decisions at the moment, given all of those parameters and the goals of your business, to enhance your brand, to enhance your company, and to compete better. So I think 2021 has been a watershed moment. It will be a watershed moment for all of us in the field of AI. I think the foundation is there with data on cloud. I think there's new fuel for value because there's so much more data available for us to bring into the enterprise, not just our own data, but the data around the world. I think the environments we work in demand us to make better decisions faster using AI. And of course, because all of us are here in this meeting, in our careers, learning, doing, trying, imagining how to make things better with AI. If there's any lesson I take from all of this, it's that we were worried about the wrong thing. We were worried that AI would take our jobs. And what we really need to worry about is that the people who know how to use AI are taking over the jobs. It's people and AI together. And so I thank you for your time and your interest and for your passion in advancing artificial intelligence and improving the world.
Great. Thanks a lot, Brett, for all these great insights. And I have a question coming from the audience. Is AI is somehow mentioned not to be mainstream yet. What is holding it back to be mainstream?
It's a couple things. There are business leaders today still who don't understand the idea of a system that is not deterministic, that a system that can be learned on data doesn't sound like something that can be controlled. And I think it creates an unnecessary and irrational fear among business leaders who don't understand the power of data and AI and how it can be used to enhance decision making. So there's a human element in leadership that's changing rapidly as AI leaders are dominating in different fields, and you see data-driven companies succeeding and winning. You look at the value of data, which is unlocked by AI, it's so massive that it will eventually show up, on the books as an asset in a company. That's how people will report. What data do you have? What do you know? And what value is it? So I think it's up to us to continue to diffuse the myths, the fears, help people realize that these systems are helpful and not replacing people's jobs. I know that's the fear. And also to continue to show value. Focus on outcomes that matter to your business, not on science experiments, not on things you could do, but what you need to do.
Great, thanks a lot. And this is exactly also what we're looking on, real use cases. How can we use cognitive technology to support the human being in our weaknesses? There is one last question I would like to take still from the audience, Brett. Should there will be a single decision process or one for stable times and one during chaos?
So that's a really interesting question. I think that the dynamic nature of the world is not going to go away, but there are urgent moments. And so all of us understood what happened during the pandemic and what it meant to go on, there's many words for it, a wartime footing, a crisis, reaction. You have to empower certain people to make decisions quickly in those moments. But those people make better decisions driven by data. So I think we have to be prepared always to have data available and insights in real time, informing us. And when there is a crisis moment, whatever the crisis is, it could be a giant outage in your business or a pandemic, you have to then empower people informed by data to make quick, fast decisions that are hopefully the best decisions for your business. I think during the pandemic, a lot of people made decisions quickly without a lot of data and made some mistakes that I think cost businesses, a lot of shareholder value. But the potential now is for us to help them make better decisions faster.
Thanks a lot. And what I personally would like to add here, because I know a lot of people are going to say now, yeah, but will we be biased or not? What happens with all this data? And for us, one of the very important things is that now we have the chance to unbias the bias by actually going through an iterative process, checking whether the algorithms are right or not. And the more data we have, obviously, the more accurate we're able to be in our decisions. So thanks a lot, Brett, for your insights. And we as Swiss Cognitive are looking very much forward for a 2021 together with you and Cognizant, driving AI for the good forward. Saying that, I would like to welcome now our next panel, the panel about digital transformation, which will be led by Penny. Penny is a professional moderator who will be leading our last expert panel about digital transformation and AI. Penny, you have held senior editorial roles at Bank Systems and Technology, Wall Street and Technology, Intelligent Enterprise and Network magazine. Now you are an executive editor technology at American Banker and Verizon. You define and lead technology coverage strategy at American Banker and Source Media Publication. It is our great honor to have someone like you with us. Your panelists sharing the panel. On one hand, we do have Sumit, who is manager of technology operation and business teams at Bank of America, comprised of over 20,000 teammates. Sumit, you are a core business-focused technologist who is passionate about responsible technology and responsible AI, which aligns to and supports your company's focus on responsible growth. You're keenly dedicated to the end-to-end development and implementation of AI to achieve the right outcomes, the right impact, and to enable positive change in outcomes globally. You are on the Council of Responsible AI at Harvard Kennedy and on the board of SciTech, CICity, a collaboration between the City of Jersey City and Liberty Science Center to bolster local education and economic growth in key STEAM sectors. You also work with governments globally to influence responsible use and practice. Second on the panel, we do have Subroto. You are head of innovation and emerging technology of Americas region for consumer healthcare group of GlaxoSmithKline. Your overall role in GSK is to accelerate digital innovation and digital transformation using emerging technology for beyond the pill initiatives and across various business lines, such as marketing, sales, supply chain, and experts. Together with you, we have Massimo. Massimo, you are a UN global expert in blockchain, cyber currency, AI, fintech, IoT, RegTech, and alternative data. You have vast experience in the international financial markets and are former university professor for fintech and international finance. Today, you are board advisor for international companies looking to raise their profiles in AI, blockchain, and IoT space. Last but not least, we do have Kamales Lardi with us. Kamales, technology is not a silver bullet solution. A clear value proposition should drive any transformation effort. This is your quote. This approach resonates well with many business leaders and has helped you, Kamales, stand out in the digital space. You are a bold and strategic thinker in digital and business transformation with over 20 years experience in the digital space with dynamic and current approaches to technology applications in business. Penny, it's my great pleasure now to hand the panel over to you.
Thank you so much, Dalit and Livia. We are all really pleased to be invited to this Swiss Cognitive panel and event, a really interesting event and a great topic. So let's start with you, Sumit. Can you share some examples of how Bank of America has deployed AI in the organization and where it's made the biggest impact?
Yeah, thanks, Benny. I'm glad to be here doing this with all of you. Yeah, for Bank of America, we do it in mainly in two places. And I think a lot of the audience knows, we are customer driven. So it's grounded in customer servicing opportunities first. Secondly, it's where we can make our internal processes more efficient. So a great example of a customer-driven implementation, which is well known in the industry, is Erica, a virtual financial assistant. It is part of our award-winning mobile application. Erica offers clients personalized, proactive guidance to help them stay on top of their finances. In terms of proof points, since this nationwide launch more than 2 years ago, Erica has helped 15 million total clients with 175 million requests. Clients interact with it approximately 400,000 times a day, up almost 100% year over year. A couple more examples, one being Dynamic Insights, an AI-driven capability that delivers personalized information to investors, part of our leading Merrill self-directed edge platform online, and Idea Builder, which basically provides actionable investing ideas from top global minds. So lots of examples, but these are some, Benny.
Thank you. And those investing ideas, will those go directly to the investors, or are they to help the advisors or the people working with investors?
Well, it's both, but mainly for the users of the platform. So if the users are investors, the ideas go to the investors. If the users are clients with consent, they get that information as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Subroto, can you give a few examples of how you're using AI at your company and where it's really making a difference? Subroto, I think you have audio off.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Hello, everyone. Sorry for that. So just to give you a context, we are using AI and ML in every aspect of our company. And I'm going to pick up 3 different use cases, which is very relevant for us. One is the predictive forecasting. We have seasonal products in our portfolio like allergy, cold, and medication. And I think everybody knows due to COVID, it has been a lot of huge run to get those medications for cold and flu. So what we do is we have a predictive model that predicts how the upcoming season would come up. And it actually helps our supply chain for better demand sensing and informing our retailers to do a proper distribution and stock up and display those products. Actually, due to COVID, did affect our models because of the new the 100-year kind of scenario we got it, and also due to the high pantry loading, we saw that. But I think the situation of this models are actually helping immensely our supply chain. We are seeing a tremendous help with that. The second one I would like to mention is going to be very critical is also sensory models. We are looking at how humans react differently to different taste, size, texture, and color of different products. It can apply to any industry in those brand industry. So we are looking at models that can help holistically to understand and predict and optimize those products for our customers. We use different parameters of text, taste, color, texture, because we have our products with, say, tablets, we have gummies, we have liquids. So we're trying to see how better we can optimize this for our customers. The other one, which is also very important and useful for people, is we are using AI in eye tracking. We have our Shopper Science Lab, which is kind of a lab where we bring in consumers, we bring our retailers, and then we have a simulated environment for our all the shelves that is being put in retailer areas. So what we do is we'll provide eye glasses for our consumers or retailers to look at the shelves, and then we have when they kind of go around the different shelves, we take up visual images. And then it takes a heat maps and then can analyze those images and see where their attention span was. How are they looking at those different products? It helps in identifying the labels. How do we place the labels? Also, it helps in identifying where do we do the placement of the products in the shelves. So these are key areas we are looking at. It very interesting areas working on from AI perspective.
Okay, thank you. And Samit, can you share where would you not use AI? Where are other technologies a better fit? Samit, I think your audio is off. Sorry.
All right. Yeah, you're right. Thank you for that. I think, look, AI is not the only tool in the toolbox, right? It is a very powerful and very valuable technology with a lot of potential. But we are customer-focused, process-led. So where we don't see a clear benefit to the customer, firstly, we think about it. Second is if AI is not the right tool for the right job, which I've first said. And third is if AI is not mature yet for the use case, we do not do it, if it cannot be developed and deployed responsibly. So I do think that we have a clear set of guidelines around problem identification first in a process that we undertake called operational excellence, which is both a pursuit and a methodology across the entire company, which basically dissects every problem, understands the root cause, and then then the choice of the solution comes next. So if AI is therefore chosen as a solution because it's right for the problem, it can deliver the right outcomes, we do it. Otherwise, we actually don't do it.
And Subroto, how do you look at it? Are there any places where you would never use AI?
I think we are right now pretty much trying to use an AI in every possible areas which we can. And then I think the areas which the key fundamental reason to start using AI is basically we look at the value of the whole project we are taking over, right? If there is a big value to it, we are seeing there's a good investment, a return of our investment coming back on those, and obviously it's going to help the consumers. It helps our internal teams to start using that products and solution based on AI. We're definitely looking into that. There are certain areas we are still not seeing a scalability happening is in our HR, in our finance section, where we are not yet implementing a newer solutions yet. It's not a big demand coming up. We are still looking at they are doing some of the chatbots are being used by them, but it's not a scalable happening. But what we are looking at more is like, how can we really democratize the AI within the organization? And so that we can have more AI as a service. So people can start still coming up with the right proposition and with the right use case, we can start using them, and then it can be easily scaled up to different lines of business from that perspective.
And Subroto, when you talk about democratizing AI, do you mean kind of letting employees execute their own implementations of AI or robotics? Some companies are doing that.
No, we are when I meant democratization of AI is like we don't want every different units to start doing the same activity again and again, right? So if you have a solution being built, certain models are being built, we want that models can be reused to other groups, so they can be easily pick as a catalog, they can extend to it, or they can add new features to it. That's what I meant for democratization of AI.
Okay, thank you. So.
Penny, can I add something to that? Just a quick one, because I think it makes sense to add to what Sumit and Subroto said. When we look at digital transformation, we tend to not start from the technology point of view. We tend to look at what is your current business problems. We tend to bring together elements of the customer value proposition, the business challenges that you're trying to address, as well as the digital maturity of the organization and what are the internal capabilities. So we bring some of these elements in, including things like market trends and developments, and technology is almost seen as just an enabler for these solutions. So we look at what are the business challenges you're trying to address and which then technology provides the capability in order to address those challenges. So it's almost kind of at the tail end of the process when we bring in a technology solution rather than approaching it from the perspective of one specific technology.
Okay, thank you. Massimo, let's come to you. We're seeing a lot of AI and robotics in very large corporations. How do you and the United Nations feel about this? Do you feel this is a completely positive trend, or are you concerned about what's going on and what the impact on, the global workforce might be?
Okay. First of all, let me start by saying a mandatory disclaimer. What I'm going to say are my personal opinions and not that of my organization. Having said that, international organizations like UN see positively the developments related to the use of AI. However, there are some concerns about the use of AI by large and also small organizations. Let's start by saying that in 2015, world leaders adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that included a set of 17 SDGs to end poverty, fight inequality, injustice, and tackle climate change. Now, this issue about artificial intelligence can be a great opportunity for the implementation of sustainable development goals, and in particular, the right to education. The tools of education, the way we learn, the access knowledge and train teachers will be changed by AI. For the UN body UNESCO, the acquisition of digital skills stands at the center of all educational programs. There is a learn-to-learn process because the pace of innovation is rapidly transforming the labor market. And also, on February 28, 2020, representatives from the Pontifical Academy for Life, Microsoft, IBM, UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and the Italian government signed the Rome Call for AI Ethics, a document developed to support an ethical approach to artificial intelligence. Now, there are the so-called Argo ethics principles, and those are transparency. In principle, AI systems must be explainable. Inclusion, the needs of all human beings must be taken into consideration. Responsibility, those who design and deploy the use of AI must proceed with responsibility and transparency. Impartiality, to avoid creating or acting according to a bias. And reliability, AI systems must be able to work reliably. And last but not least, security and privacy. AI systems must work securely and respect the privacy of users. Now, there are some AI ethical issues, and I throw these questions. Might AI and algorithms infringe fundamental human rights for privacy and data confidentiality to freedom of choice? How can we ensure that social and cultural stereotypes are not replicated in AI programming when it comes to gender discrimination, for instance? How can we ensure accountability when decisions and actions are fully automated? And also, how do we ensure that AI is developed in a transparent way? These are the questions that I leave to the audience.
That's a great list of questions, and I'm sure I know a lot of companies think about all of those questions, and they're not all easy to answer. Sumit, do you think about all those items, and can you think of an example of where Bank of America is addressing one of those concerns specifically? Sumit, I think you're on mute.
Okay, I would say that I would say that we are basically addressing these questions deeply, across the entire way we develop and deploy technology. So it's not one example. It goes through everything we do. And I look at a point Kamalis made as well. We first of all deploy AI when AI is ready. It's about being deliberate, thoughtful, methodical. It's about choosing the right problem to solve with AI, understanding what the outcome of that AI is to the customer, or the consequences, and really taking a step back and saying, why are you building this, which is as important as what you're building. So having the right processes, the right procedures, the right frameworks, and the governance models, having independent model risk management and data management functions that give you that assurance. And to Massimo's point on diversity, make sure you have the right diversity, which is massively important. Diverse teams produce the best outcomes. So we do have a diverse workforce that's building, testing, and training the AI systems. More than 50% of our workforce are women. More than 45% are U.S. workforce of people of color. Even our management team is 50% women, very diverse. Even our board is 47% diverse. One of 4 S&P companies with 6 or more women on the board. So all that goes into, Penny, ensuring that you choose the right problem at the first place, deploy the solution, and have the right rigor and governance for deployment properly. So I think I would say our 3 billion plus initiative portfolio, that's been the case over 10 years now, almost 10 years now. And you know Kathy very well. We basically make sure that the entire portfolio goes through that rigor, not just one project.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Subroto? Can you give an example of how GlaxoSmithKline is addressing one of the concerns that Massimo raised, whether it's privacy or security or diversity or bias or any of the others?
Yeah, definitely. So let me just pick up the 2 use cases I mentioned. I will pick up one of them, like the modeling cases, ML modeling, right? So what we do is whenever we kind of do those models, right, we try to make sure that we are having enough training data set for that. And then another thing we are trying to enable right now is called ML Ops. So I think pretty much everybody is aware of. Like, it's a better way to score the models. We have to monitor the drift detection. And also what we do is we try to bring a diverse ML team. Just to give you context, we have now a data scientist team being engaged, and all of them are, we have physicians there, we have pharmacists, we have data engineers from across the different board, we have all sorts of different diverse team looking at the data sets, and also we have an accountability and testing rigor phase for that. So for this kind of models, what we do is we don't want to deploy the model right away. We do a set of testing for different seasons. We kind of also do in a smaller segment of different regions, and then we look at that and see how we really getting the results before we scale out to other regions. So that's one way of looking at the ML models we do. We just give you another very interesting example. We actually built a voice tool, voice search tool. So any brands, we kind of look at that when we speak about it or somebody wants to pronounce it. For example, a brand called Volta and Gel that is being spoken differently by different set of people. The accent is different. So we didn't want that the voice recognition tool would not be understanding it clearly. So what we did is, as example, we went around the company, since we have a diverse company and we believe in diversity a big time. We took the voice samples from different set of people, and then we trained the models. We call it a custom speech model. So that helped really build up a very good way of recognizing the different accents and different diverse teams over here, so we don't come up with a wrong interpretation of people speaking to it. So we try to do a various ways to make sure that we have try to remove the bias out of the system from there.
Okay, thank you for that example. Kamal, as you talk to and work with a lot of companies, what are the biggest hurdles or reservations or concerns that people have about deploying AI in any of these kinds of scenarios?
I think one of the key things that stands out to me, particularly when we speak to business leaders across different industries and different functional areas, is the misconception around what AI can do. And this is a big piece, because when it's not uncommon when we speak to C-level executives, for them to have in their strategic objectives or in the initiatives that they've planned, things like implement AI for X percentage revenue gains, very broad goals for marking kind of revenue gains or productivity gains that they want to achieve with these systems. And I think this creates a misconception that AI systems or AI solutions are able to solve all kinds of business problems. So put that in place and you can resolve a lot of issues. I think we have to keep in mind that AI systems or solutions are a catalyst for digital transformation. So we need to first have a good understanding for what we want to achieve as a business, how we want to function as an organization in the digital economy, who we're trying to target in this digital economy, and what are some of the challenges.
Sorry, Kamal, you're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if there's any change you could make. Maybe close the windows, close browser.
I don't have anything open. I'm going to just try. Can you hear me better now?
Oh, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I might have to come closer to the laptop. But as I was saying, I think it's very important for business leaders to gain
So we have to go to Penny back. Kamalas is not working the line. Sorry about.
I'm sorry. It must be a connection problem or something. So let's go back to you, Massimo. A lot of people are afraid that AI will kill jobs, especially people lower on the food chain, I would say. Do you think that's a legitimate fear? And what do you think the corporate community ought to be doing about that?
Well, my idea, this question about job creation or job destruction, and my answer is job transformation. Let's get to that. The net impact of AI on job market for me is job transformation. History is plenty of examples where technology caused the end of some jobs when new ones were born. For instance, in the textile industry, or the secretarial jobs partially replaced by computers, and many other examples. Now, there is a need to rethink the usage of human labor for activities like call center operations, warehouse activities, trucking and transportation, brick and mortar retail, and even mining, oil and gas activities. However, new jobs related to the use of artificial intelligence applications We'll need qualified employees for that purpose. In addition, AI applications will be easy to be used also for not highly skilled individuals who will have their chance to find jobs. Let's give an example, for instance, of transformation of jobs we experience, and that is of train ticket inspectors. When in the past, the train ticket inspector punched the physical ticket, now he or she scans the barcode of the ticket, either the physical one or on the mobile phone. It doesn't do the same, it does the same thing, but in a different way. That is what I call job transformation. And that is what I think will happen with AI.
Okay, unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our session. So that was one example of how jobs are changing. Subroto, how do you see jobs changing? And is your company trying to do anything to kind of help people either with reskilling or, as Massimo was saying, making these applications easier to work with? Anything to kind of help people along this path and, you know, make sure AI is used for good as well?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like AI is not considered as a threat. I would always say it's an AI plus. So human plus is an assistant to us, internet assistant to us. So I think what we are doing is trying to, as we are a consumer, customer, and expert-driven company, we always try to help where we can. And then within the company, we are trying to make sure we are reskilling people. There's a lot of demand coming up. How do we learn this? How do we make changes to that? There's always an approach towards that. We always make sure it's always helping people in a good way.
Thank you. And Sumit, how about at Bank of America? What efforts are you making to reskill people or in other ways help them with AI adoption?
Yeah, Penny, I think, look, I think all the points are very valid. For us, it's about making sure that we tell people, I think to Massimo's point as well, that a lot of the jobs are not going to change in that sense, in the sense the work is going to change. But we're going to still be, as a bank, processing payments, settling securities, making loans, moving money. We've been doing that for a long time. So having a clear view for skill sets of the future that we need, having a clear plan to bring the people along with us. We have a reskilling program across the company for employees to take advantage of. We in technology and operations have a global technology and operations university, which basically offers 1,000+ courses, self-directed at your own pace. So far, more than 3 million courses have been completed by Bank of America employees. It's very skill-based, and also 45,000 badges have been earned. And I think we are more and more gearing towards hiring people based on skill than on experience only or having an elaborate resume. So we are taking a lot of effort, and also starts with good leadership, management, career development of your people, and people understanding that they own their own careers to some degree, and they need to take advantage of these offerings. So I think it's a great point in job transformation. I think it's sort of over-exaggerated about the job changing. It's really the work that's changing, and it's not even changing 100%. Sometimes it's changing 30, 40%, with some of the work being done by machines, and you're doing more high-end interactions with the machines and stuff. It frees up people to do creativity, judgment, decision-making, communication, all the kind of stuff that we people, humans, like to do best. Penny.
Sure, and then of course, new jobs being created for data scientists and AI specialists and so forth. Any last word on the new jobs being created or other ways that AI might be used for good across all organizations?
I would say it would be a huge missed opportunity if we do not, do AI for good, because it's got tremendous potential to do that, to lift up society. If we prioritize, where it can impact the customer, prioritize on outcomes, prioritize on having ownership and accountability, and being deliberate and methodical of where we use it. Don't chase after the technology, chase after the problem. And I think there are hundreds and hundreds of use cases that you will see come out where it can be done properly. But if it's not done responsibility, we fear that there could be a backtracking that will happen, which is not in anybody's interest. So I think there are hundreds of examples. It's just incumbent upon us to take advantage of it and do it in the right way.
That makes sense. I'm afraid we are out of time. I've really enjoyed this session. I want to thank you, Sumit, Subroto, Kamalas, and Massimo. I think it's been a really good discussion. Thank you all for participating. I want to thank Dalit and Livia for inviting us all and for all of the staff at Swiss Cognitive. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Penny. Thanks a lot, all of you. Also, we enjoyed it very much, and I'm looking very much forward to have you again with us next year for further discussions. There is so much to say, so much to discuss, and we had quite some questions, and unfortunately, we're running out of time. We will try to catch up on those questions then later on. Now, last but not least, we're getting to our final keynote. Florin will share with us his practical insights, AI in 2021, a global outlook, literally. Florin, he's an executive IT architect, cognitive systems at IBM Systems Europe, Middle East, and Africa, whom I introduced already at the beginning. Florin, the final stage is yours. Welcome.
And a lot of information. But the question is, are we aware of the implication of the energy consumption and how much CO2 those trainings of machine learning models are generating? So this was a question initially started with with the engagement we had at MIT and IBM Lab with Chris Hill here and one of our fellows, John Cohn. When you get access to the largest AI system you have access, do you care as a researcher how energy you'll consume, how much CO2 you're going to produce? And this was on Satori MIT cluster, which is, to my knowledge right now in Green 500, the single system which is air cooled in that top 10 list. So this is amazing stuff. So one of the questions came to with our discussion was, how we can make data scientists more aware of the environmental impact of training those deep nets, right? So how we empower them with some tools to make them aware that when they train something, when they tune some parameters, when they launch a couple of trainings across multiple systems, they get the right expectation in terms of the CO2. So that was the first question we had. So we started to implement into the system a way for the data scientists to track the energy consumption, therefore the CO2 levels associated with every training that they launch. And this was not a trivial job, but we achieved it at scale on Satori cluster, and this is an example of a single pod of Satori cluster at MIT, composed on 16 IBM AC922 systems, and with those crazy numbers here, a terabyte of memory each system, 4 voltage GPUs, and so on and so forth. So we had did a lot of tests, and you can see here a couple of things we tried to achieve. First of all, to see, if you train from a single system and you try to scale, is that kind of energy consumption linearly with how many images you can process per second from all those accelerators? And that turns not to be the case. So it's accelerating as you consume more and more accelerators, more and more systems. And obviously you process more information per second. And as you can see in this chart here, as you process more images per second, obviously you consume more energy, and therefore you are going to emit more CO2. Moving forward, one question came, okay, if someone wants to train for a couple of hours, let's say in interactive way, how much it will be across the system and multiple systems? And we can see here that, for 1 hour, just training a simple ResNet 50 with TensorFlow across 8,000 iterations, you'll generate, you'll consume around 20 kilowatts hour for 16 systems like this. And obviously, people, they don't train only for 1 hour. They tend to go for 1 day, couple of weeks, and couple of months, as we have seen. And in this case, you see the training for 1 day and how this, the energy consumption is starting, from a couple of systems around 100 kilowatts hour, and going upward to 64 accelerators and 16 AC922s at 500 kilowatts hour. So that's interesting because we tend to say, well, that's linearly, but it's not, because we have the communication between the system goes and the data that has to travel across all the systems, and so on and so forth. And this is only to a single POTS of 60 system. Try to imagine, if you expand that with 5, with 10, with 20, what's going on there. Another thing was, okay, we need to address things inside of a system to understand, what is actually making a system to consume this and when, right? So we have identified that there is a preparation stage when you bring your data to the system from your central storage, where the system will not consume. And then when you start the training, so you start your batches, the power consumption of the system will go as the accelerators will start being used. And this is mostly constant across the training. In this case, it's a single system, so we can see that the average is around 160 watts. That's the average instant power consumption doing the training for 1,000 of iterations. When you try to put a pod, so 16 systems like this in a perspective, that is kind of in the same pattern, so similar across all the systems, which is sometimes is a good indication that the model is scaling well. In this case, this is well known for ResNet 50, but there are other models that they don't scale so well, and therefore other kind of techniques have to be applied, and I will speak in a while about it. Right, and if you say, well, okay, let's have this into a 1 day perspective, and let's put the CO2e as well in the perspective of the how many let's say GPUs or accelerators do I use in this case, and how many images I can process here. And you can see this in this chart is that when I'm processing 1,000, let's say, or 8,000 of those images, I don't generate too much carbon. But when I start processing 137,000 of images per second across all those systems, I start having problems because I'm generating a lot of carbon. So we can say that at scale, the CO2e levels will not scale linearly compared with the artificial neural networks model scaling, which is interesting to see. And we believe that this is dependent on the network itself, on the type of the architecture that you use, and type of the data that you use. So in this case, we use the ImageNet dataset for training. Now, it's interesting if you go at the European Union level and say, okay, I want to calculate the CO2 values for kilograms. It tends to be different between the countries because of the type of the energy that the country itself is generating. So you can get all those numbers from European Environment Agency. However, the bigger values can be considered only if there are countries, for example, they get more from the green energy. So that's interesting to see. So the Malta has very small things. Germany is 0.44 kilograms per CO2 per kilowatt hour. So that is indicating that it is not all about the system you use. It's about as well the location where you decide to train your network, and that's why we see a lot of training for months happening in Iceland, for example, where they have those very small values there. And that to put it in the perspective, if you ask yourself, okay, but how much I will need to offset based on a specific training. So let's take, for example, here the big GAN, where everyone is just throwing data there and train across 8 systems like this, or half of a pod. we can offset into 20 trees per month. So 20 trees per month, we offset the training that we kind of do for a big GAN, which is for a month, right? So as a conclusion, we can say a couple of things. We can say that consumption for a household is around 10 kilowatts per day. That is equivalent of training on a single system, right? So just as an idea. And if you really want to go deeper, we want to enforce people right now on the CO2 levels and not to the number of hours that they can really train on the system. We encourage people to use model checkpoint, transfer learning as much as they can, and to package their own data sets in HDF5 formats, ZAP formats, CF formats, which are helping the system to speed up, to consume less and less energy. Moving forward, we believe that rethinking model scaling for convolutional neural network has to happen in the way efficient nets are today existing. Data efficient artificial neural networks have to be implemented. So less data while preserving the efficiency. We need to rethink the way we actually do these things. Learning with multiple networks for transfer learning. We need to, apply multiple networks in a single transfer. Deep compression and pruning while training artificial neural nets have to happen as well. And use of more hardware-aware artificial neural networks in terms of latency. So they have to be aware of how those things are going. So in conclusion, we believe that there is a huge room for improvement and make people aware of all those implications, because the CO2 levels are growing across all the data centers where those systems are existing.
Thanks a lot. That was a great final keynote and insights. Thanks to everyone. It was our last Cognitive Virtual in 2020. 3 hours of great experience, great thoughts. Now I would like to summarize a little bit of what we've heard. AI helps us to grow the data, perform with more data, and make more accurate decisions is one of the things that we heard today. But we need also to build trust with the general public, as Kay mentioned, asking ourselves, how will a solution affect me and the person next to me? If we don't feel comfortable with it, we should go on developing such solutions. Everyone has responsibility for responsible AI. And what Massimo said, a huge importance of collaboration with experts. And what Sumit said, in very diverse teams developing AI-related solutions. And one of the important things that I would like to mention is from Christopher Painter. Technology is neutral. It's the human element who abuses it to the bad purpose. One of the most important things for me is that we make sure we accept each other, cross-culture and cross-borders, taking care of each other and building a healthy and responsible future for our young generation and ensure a safe world for them. This is definitely our responsibility with and without AI. For us, this is one of the prerequisites to ensure a responsible AI if we accept each other's and listening to each other's. Saying this, take care, stay healthy, and let's catch up in 2021 with recharged batteries and positive energy for a prosperous new year. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Andy, my co-founder, who actually sits behind the technology and makes this run. It's a huge stress and very tough because, as you know, sometimes technology doesn't work the way we want. This is what makes us also very human.
Thanks, Dalit, for this intro. I can only give you an outlook to 2021. And we will do different things like events, like campaigning, like awareness, bringing people together like ambassadors, corporates, institutes, and organizations. That's our aim, to bring people together, to leverage their knowledge to their best for the corporates, for the institutes, wherever you come, wherever you're from, which direction you were coming and to which direction you're heading. This is so important to exchange in such a good way that we overcome this uncertainty time. So 2021 is also our time. Our means our community. So we will doing lots of different things like events. So join us on Twitter, join us on LinkedIn in different groups or on the corporate so that you have the latest insights. So I hand over to you, Dalit, and I have to say, as we always do, why wait? Oh, sorry. No. Again, this is what, why wait?
Act now and share for success. Thanks to all of you. Bye and take care. It was great having you virtually on stage.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.